Hey guys, tonight, we're going to step barefoot into the muddy rice fields of feudal Japan, where dragonflies skim low across the water, and the thick summer air is heavy with the scent of smoke, sweat, and scorched earth. There are no temple bells echoing through the dusk, no elegant haiku drifting in the breeze. There is only the shrill chorus of insects hidden in the young rice, the faint rustle of torn cloth against thatched grass, and the sharp, unsteady breathing of a newborn child emerging into chaos, and that child is you. So before we venture any further down this path, take a moment to like this video and hit subscribe, but only if you truly feel like you belong in this world. I'd love to know where you're listening from, what time it is where you are, and what led you here tonight. Share your thoughts in the comments, because no matter how far apart we may be, we're all walking through this same story together. Now, turn off the lights. Let the steady hum of the fan carry you like the distant song of cicadas on a summer night. Take a deep breath. Settle in for tonight's journey, to a place where swords remain sheathed, but blood is already waiting, and though you don't yet know how to write your own name, fate has already carved it into the blade. Morning mist clings low to the ground, curling around your ankles as the sun tears through the horizon like a sword being drawn from its sheath. Somewhere beyond the reeds, in a quiet hut with walls made of thatch and silence, a child is born into chaos, already poised for their very first battle. That child is you. You are not the offspring of nobles, cradled in silk and sweet promises. Nor are you the carefree farm boy, dirt-smudged and wide-eyed, watching the wind ripple through barley fields. No. You are Miyamoto Musashi, or at least, the rough, untamed version of him, still formless, still feral. You come into the world screaming, thrashing, radiating a wild, furious energy, as if the very existence of this world has insulted you by daring to exist. You reek of trouble and rusted steel, as though fate itself has already decided you will shed blood before you can even form a full sentence. There are no lullabies for you. No gentle coos. Only the rustle of sleeves, whispered prayers from the midwives. And the invisible weight of expectation pressing down on your tiny shoulders. You are born into war. A world where peace is but a fleeting illusion, and survival is a skill. A world where blades whisper in the dark before men ever speak. Before your eyes can even fully open, you are handed a legacy, a destiny forged in violence. It waits for you like an inheritance no one dares to question, and let's be honest, chances are you won't survive it. Your eyes open into chaos. It's around the year 1584, and you're born either in Harima province or Mimasaka, nobody knows for sure. Even the exact place where your story begins is contested, like a battlefield claimed by two sides. The spelling of your name? Slippery. You begin life as Benasuk, a name that rolls off the tongue but never quite sticks. Already, your identity is smoke and shadow. Your father, Shinmen Munisai, is a samurai. Not a high-ranking, land-owning, storybook kind. He's lower tier, disgruntled, and sporting a mustache sharp enough to cut through excuses. He might be teaching martial arts to a minor lord, or he might just be very good at hitting things and calling it a profession. Records disagree, bicker even. But one fact remains carved in stone: he expects everything from you. His love, if it exists, is filtered through the sound of wooden swords smacking flesh. Affection is measured in bruises. You crawl before you walk. But you spar before you speak. You don't coo, you growl. You hate sandals early on. Bugs fascinate you, particularly the crunchy kind. And anything that resembles a stick, you wield like a blade. The world around you is made of weapons and warnings. At night, you curl up on straw mats, the smell of mildew in your nose, one eye half open. The adults around you talk about death the way people now talk about traffic and rain. Your mother. She drifts out of the picture like fog over a river. Some say she died when you were barely forming words. Others whisper she ran off into the hills, escaping a life too sharp, too loud. Either way, she becomes a quiet ache, never spoken aloud, just something that makes your edges sharper, your silences deeper. Your father shapes you into something narrow and lethal, a weapon with lungs. By 5, you're wielding a bakken, a wooden training sword, longer than your own arms can easily manage. You strike at trees, chickens, other children, and your own reflection in muddy puddles. Not as play. As practice. Your games are not innocent. They end in imaginary deaths and real bruises. The other kids in the village either cling to you or scatter like leaves in wind. Historians argue still, were you a prodigy, or simply relentless? You lost often, at first. Came home bleeding, limping, teeth loose. But you always went back. And each time, your grin got a little wider. There's a tale about you challenging a passing monk to a wrestling match at 6. Truth or myth, no one can say. But if it didn't happen, it still could have. That's the point, your father does not sing lullabies. He crouches beside the fire, a chicken bone in hand, pointing at your chest. He shows you where the throat is. Where the arteries live. Where to stab so the screams don't last. This is not bedtime storytelling. It's anatomy for warfare. You are not cuddled. You are coached. And when he disappears, assassinated or abandoned, no one knows, you are too hardened to cry. By 7 or 8, you're alone. Utterly. And not entirely surprised, you grow fast. Your limbs stretch out like vines, knobby and strong. You earn the nickname Takizo, roughly meaning rough bamboo. It fits. You are hard, sharp, and unwilling to bend. Bathing becomes a rare event, usually the result of falling into streams while chasing wild birds. Dirt cakes your arms like armor. You look half boy, half legend. At 10, you kill your first animal, likely a wild boar, and eat it mostly raw, tearing into it with hands that no longer hesitate. Your eyes begin to shift. There's a flicker in them that adults notice and quietly avoid. You talk to trees, sometimes out loud. Maybe it's spiritual. Maybe it's loneliness. Probably both, you have no permanent home. You sleep under shrines, inside half-collapsed rice huts, or on the forest floor with your feet wrapped in rags. You steal food when you must, then vanish into the woods again. Some villagers speak of you the way people speak of ghosts or spirits. With a mix of fear and reluctant respect. In all this silence and chaos, you find something strange, comfort. Not in peace, but in the hush that hangs before a fight begins. It's the stillness that draws you. The pressure in the air, the invisible countdown. You begin to see combat as others see music. There is a rhythm in every footstep. A beat in every inhale. You begin to choreograph imaginary battles the way others sketch flowers, then one day, the world tilts. You see real warriors for the first time. They arrive on horseback, slicing through your village like a procession of gods. Armor gleaming like beetle shells. Swords sheathed but humming with promise. Their movements are measured. Perfect. You follow them at a distance. Breath caught in your throat. You don't want their wealth. Or their status. You want what moves behind their eyes. The discipline. The clarity. The purpose. No one offers it to you, so you decide to take it. You begin studying under a monk named Dorinbo. He teaches you the basics, reading, writing, discipline of a different kind. You are not an eager pupil. You doodle in the margins. You twitch during lessons. You whisper duel strategies to yourself when you're supposed to be learning poetry. But something sticks. Enough to make sense of maps. Enough to scribble your name. Enough to write your own philosophy, centuries later. Meanwhile, your obsession with combat grows deeper. You construct practice dummies from straw and old bamboo. You tie them to trees. You train until your hands split and blister, then heal, then split again. You learn where to strike, how to paralyze, how to rattle the mind before the blade even touches. You begin carrying 2 swords. One for balance. One for belief. By 12, you develop what a lord would later call the stare. You lock eyes and refuse to blink. People feel it. They flinch. They back away. It becomes a kind of weapon in itself, something wordless and heavy. Then, it happens. You're 13. Word spreads of a swordsman passing through, a man named Arimakihei. He belongs to the Shinto-ryu school and challenges strangers in public for coin and reputation. You hear it. You walk toward it, you, a child in rags with sunburnt skin, a belly half empty, and a practice sword carved by hand, stand before him with your teeth clenched and your jaw set. You challenge him. A full-grown man. A trained warrior, and to everyone's disbelief, he accepts. The villagers gather. Eyes wide. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. No one expects you to win. Most aren't sure why you're there. Some think it's bravery. Others think madness. Either way, it feels like the prelude to a tragedy. You step forward like something conjured from a fever dream. The man approaches, slow and composed. The fight is over in seconds. You move like smoke, strike like thunder. 1 blow. Maybe 2. Your opponent crumples. Blood in the dirt. Silence in the crowd. He doesn't rise. You don't smile. You don't cheer. You exhale. Then, without a word, you disappear into the hills again. No bows. No glory. That day rewrites your life. Some say it was fate. Others say luck. A few insist something darker, something divine or demonic, had already touched you. Either way, you leave as something new. You are a child, and you are a killer, and you are not done, not even close. You're 13, and you've just killed a man. No one told you what it would feel like. Not your father, not the monk with the quiet eyes, not even the instincts that had carried you through every scrape-knee skirmish so far. You thought it would be electric. You thought it would set something ablaze inside you. Maybe there would be glory. Maybe a little fear, like the edge of a cold blade near your neck. But instead, it feels like silence. Not the kind that comes with snowfall or solitude. This is a silence that nests behind your ribs, still and heavy. You don't tremble. You don't cry. You just feel cold. Not skin-deep cold, but a deeper, hollower kind. Like something has been scooped out of you and left unfilled. The man you killed was not a demon. He wasn't some towering villain or snarling beast. He was trained. He had discipline, posture, a lineage. Arimakihei was a practitioner of a formal style, with a reputation that stretched beyond town borders. He wore a clean robe. He spoke with confidence. He had a real sword. You had none of those things. What you did have was nerve. Precision. An instinct born not from textbooks or scrolls, but from every bruise and every long night spent rehearsing your breath with the moon. You saw an opening. You took it. And now, the story of you has begun to spread. Like wildfire in dry grass, myth begins to curl at the edges of your name. You don't see it that way. You're not interested in stories. You don't stay for applause. You don't collect followers or sign any scrolls. You slip out of town before the whispering begins. You walk until the road forgets your footprints. Your clothes smell like ash from old campfires. Your feet bleed through cracked straw sandals. You eat whatever you can take. Dried rice, if you're lucky. If not, pine needles and silence. No one offers payment. No one offers praise. Your skill is still unclaimed, like a blade without a sheath. Your second kill doesn't come with ceremony. It's not a duel. It's not even honorable. It's a roadside scuffle. You're walking through a narrow trail, half dreaming, when a group of bandits steps out of the trees. They think you're easy prey. A tall, bony kid with calloused hands and ragged sleeves. You don't look dangerous. You look like a bruise in human form, but you've been studying. Footwork, breath, distance. You've meditated on movement the way monks meditate on mortality. You let them move in close. You wait. And then you strike. Like a hornet from a rotten log, you explode outward. You don't remember every detail. One goes down and doesn't rise. One runs away, leaving part of his ear behind. The others scatter. You pick up a dagger from the dead one and continue walking. You do not look back. People debate that encounter. Some say it was self-defense. Others call it a test. You never clarify. You let the story warp and grow without you. As months pass, your limbs stretch. Your body begins to match your ambition. Your jaw grows sharper. Your voice begins to crack and deepen. But your eyes stay the same. Cold. Calculating. As if always measuring a single, invisible line between your blade and someone else's throat. You start to move differently. Not just with purpose, but with a weight behind each step. As if each moment has become a preparation for the next strike, you wander. Province to province. Village to village. The Sengoku period is dying out, but not quietly. There are still battles. Still clan wars burning like small brushfires across the landscape. Samurai still drift, weapons in hand and no masters to answer to. You move among them like a shadow. You are not a lord's vassal. You are not a highway thief. You exist in the strange in-between. Too dangerous to ignore, too undefined to categorize. Eventually, your path takes you to Kyoto. To the gates of the Yoshioka school. The Yoshioka school has roots. Prestige. An entire philosophy wrapped around its teachings. You arrive like a riddle without a question. You don't ask for permission. You challenge them outright. Not one duel. Not a single teacher. You challenge the very structure. The method. The idea. Your style is raw. You fight with 2 swords. No armor. Just instinct, breath, and the will to strike before thinking. You want to see if it holds up. Your first duel is against the headmaster himself. Yoshioka Seijiro. He arrives early, dressed in a robe crisp with tradition, his blade perfectly polished. His face is unreadable. Calm. Waiting. You arrive late, not by accident. You've discovered something. When you delay, the other man unravels. Anger boils. Muscles tense. Minds race. Patience turns to anxiety. That moment of waiting softens the edge of even the most disciplined opponent. You make him wait. An hour passes. Then you arrive. Calm. Silent. Carrying a wooden sword, Seijiro is furious. His center cracks. In one swift motion, you strike. Not to kill. Just to break. He falls unconscious. Not dead, but ruined. The school does not forget. They send his brother next. Yoshioka Denshikairo. He brings students. Spectators. This time, you change the script. You arrive early. You climb a tree and wait. When he steps into the ring, confident and surrounded, you fall from the sky. One strike. One death. Before his sword even clears its scabbard, he is gone. The crowd scatters like dry leaves, a third duel is scheduled. But this time, it's not about honor. It's revenge. The school gathers its fighters. Some say there were 20. Others claim over 100. All armed. All prepared to end your story. You know this, so you arrive before dawn. You crouch near Ichijoji Temple, hidden in reeds, your breath visible in the cold morning air. The dew soaks your sleeves. You wait in perfect stillness. When the first men arrive, you strike. Not in open battle, but like a whisper through tall grass. You do not stand your ground. You vanish and reappear. You cut and disappear again. Some say you killed 10 that morning. Some say 20. One scroll claims you moved like a ghost. Another says no one ever saw you after the first cut. Whatever happened, one truth remains. The Yoshioka school shattered that day. Its reputation dissolved. Enrollment dried up. The name became a cautionary tale. You became something more. A rumor. A warning. A ghost passed between sword schools and campfires, and you still had not reached your 20th year. You leave Kyoto behind. The blood still fresh on your sleeves. Though you do your best to wash it away in river water. There are more schools. More styles. More patterns to understand and dismantle. You don't follow a path. You pull the path behind you, step by step. Somewhere along this journey, the second sword becomes more than just a backup. It becomes a belief. A way of seeing the world. 2 blades. 1 rhythm. 1 soul split across balance and chaos. The long blade for reach. The short one for speed. The form becomes Nitten Ichiryu, 2 heavens as one. It is still raw. Still becoming. But the idea burns clear in you, brighter than before. You begin to sleep less. You eat sparingly. Your training sharpens. Your meditation deepens. You start to hear your own heartbeat like a drum guiding your next motion. Villagers begin to recognize your face. Some greet you with rice and water. Others pull their children indoors and bar the gates. You do not blame them. Trouble follows your name like a shadow with its own hunger. People come to test you. To trap you. You adapt. You begin setting traps of your own. Hair tied to branches. Stones scattered to hear footfalls. At night, your rest is never fully restful. Eventually, you start visiting temples. Not for forgiveness. Not for prayer. But for stillness. You sit with monks. Zen masters. Men who speak in riddles and silence. They say things like, the sword that kills is also the sword that gives life. At first, the words slide off you like rain on oiled paper. You're too full of fire to understand, but one monk looks at you for a long time and says, you are not yet real. You are only reaction. The words follow you like a shadow, you don't forget them. You let them sit beside your sword. You wonder, what does it mean to be real? You stop chasing duels. Not completely. But you begin to choose. You start watching more than moving. You draw sword angles in the dirt. You listen to the wind in the trees. You try to find rhythm in the disorder. Still, the world keeps calling. One morning, you wake in a shack. The village it once belonged to has been burned to the ground. A farmer appears with his son. The boy is quiet, but his eyes are hungry for something more. The father begs. You refuse. Then reconsider. Then refuse again. Finally, you agree. The boy is awkward. His feet drag. His grip is weak. But he watches you with a predator's patience. You show him how to hold a sword, he teaches you how to speak again. Not like a killer. But like a person. People argue over this moment. Was he your first student? Did you have others before? Were there secret apprentices hidden in your wake? No one knows. But this boy, whoever he was, leaves a mark. You begin to change, not just in body, but in thought. You question things. You see where your victories came from. Some, you earned with skill. Others with luck. Others still with surprise. You start to draw. Paint. You are not very good. But the brush slows your hand. Makes you think differently. You trace the shape of a bird's wings. A horse's back. The way clouds break apart. You try to understand beauty without needing to own it. Your swordplay shifts. Now you're not cutting to survive. You're cutting to understand, but peace never stays long. There is a name on the horizon. Sasaki Kojiro. Another swordsman. Another story. A blade almost too long to carry. A duel waiting just beyond the dawn, but that is a story for another time. You're maybe 17 now. Or 18. It's hard to say. Time doesn't tick for you the way it does for others. You don't measure your years with candles on a cake or lines etched on a wall. Your sense of age comes from scars and changing winds. You wake with frost in your hair, you sleep with soil under your nails, and the only consistent calendar is the slow, ghostly arc of the moon and the rhythm of footsteps, both yours and the ones following close behind. But one thing is certain, you've killed, you've survived, and each time you've walked away not just intact, but refined. Not necessarily wiser in the way elders mean it. You don't sit around pondering the nature of virtue. But sharper. More focused. Like a blade that has found its grindstone and now refuses to dull, and now, you have a problem, you become too well known to disappear. Your name has escaped your own mouth and started crawling into the mouths of others. It lingers in sake houses and training halls, on the breath of merchants, monks, and mercenaries. A name half myth, half man. To some, you're a challenge. To others, an insult. To more than a few, a target. Letters begin to arrive. Challenges. Invitations to duel. Some written in delicate calligraphy with polite wording. Others scratched and angry, crooked lines like the handwriting itself is itching for blood. They want to face you. On bridges. In temple courtyards. Outside tea shops where bystanders sip in silence. You never refuse. But you never respond too quickly, either. You've learned that waiting is not weakness. It is strategy. Anticipation can unmake a man before a sword ever does. Your life is not comfortable. Not even close. You live rougher than most dogs. You don't have a home, not really. Your possessions can fit in a cloth bundle. 2 changes of clothing, a flint, a few coins, and your swords. You often walk barefoot, sometimes because you lost your sandals in a stream, sometimes just because you want to feel the earth and remind yourself that pain is part of the path. Still, something has shifted inside you. You're no longer a wild creature tearing through challenges like a storm. There is calculation now. Focus. You begin to visit formal martial arts schools, not to enroll, because that would feel like captivity, but to study them. You watch. You listen. And then you challenge. You duel instructors, absorb their movements, crack their styles like shells, and then leave before the tea is poured. No lingering. No ceremony. You take what you need and continue forward. You are not a brawler anymore. You're a tactician. Yes, you still carry your 2 swords. They are never far from your hands. But more often now, your real weapon is your mind. Observation becomes your sharpest edge. Every new school you encounter offers a different rhythm. A different philosophy. You don't mimic them. You dissect them. You note the stances that leave the ribs open. The footwork that signals retreat. You begin to sense that fear has a flavor, and hesitation has a sound. You can hear it. You can taste it. You begin to write, not poetry. Not yet a book. But notes. Scribbles in the corners of borrowed scrolls. Diagrams drawn with charcoal on bark or rice wrappers. You don't consider yourself a writer. You don't chase beauty with your brush. But you have begun to recognize that the world floods your senses, and you must filter it somehow. Your hand becomes a sieve. What remains on the page are seeds of something larger, and yet, you remain entirely yourself. You forget to bathe for days. You offend lords by bowing too casually or showing up to dinner with twigs in your hair. You once insulted a daimyo simply by entering his presence barefoot and commenting on the poor craftsmanship of his ancestral spear. You didn't mean to. You just have the discipline of a monk and the social grace of a raccoon. There is a story, possibly fake, but persistent, about you being invited to a nobleman's estate. You arrived 2 hours late, tracked mud across the floor, devoured 3 bowls of rice, insulted a hanging scroll, and then curled up to sleep in the garden. When the host asked if you were feeling unwell, you replied, "No. I just prefer the breeze." Whether or not it happened, it reflects a deeper truth: you don't care for formality. You prefer function. You are polite only when it serves purpose. Your loyalty lies not in hierarchy, but in clarity. Your curiosity expands beyond the sword. You begin experimenting with unfamiliar weapons. Not because you need them, but because your mind itches for new patterns. You practice with spears. With staffs. With iron fans. Once, you sharpen an oar and duel with it just to see if it could work. It does, but peace. That experiment fails. For a short while, you try. You settle in a village. You help a carpenter repair roofs in exchange for food and floor space. You carry planks. You climb ladders. You go a week without unsheathing your blade. The rhythm of wood and wind almost soothes you. You wonder, briefly, if this might be enough. Then the local thug arrives. He demands coin from the carpenter. You step in. You knock him flat with a length of firewood. He returns with 3 more. You leave them groaning in the dust, still using firewood. By the end of the week, the village is divided. Half treat you like a savior. The other half looks at you like you've cursed the soil. You understand. You leave before dawn. No farewells. You head north. The landscape hardens. The trees thin. The sky turns iron gray. You start sleeping in temples, not for prayer, but for shelter. The monks see something in you. Not grace. Not serenity. Hunger. A thirst for precision. For understanding, one monk places an old, worn copy of The Art of War in your hands. You read it in a single sitting. Then again. And again. You don't agree with every word. But one phrase lodges in you like a splinter: all warfare is based on deception. That line becomes a cornerstone. You begin to understand that victory is not granted by strength alone. Or speed. Or rage. It is earned by perception. By knowing your opponent better than they know themselves. You begin winning fights before the first movement. Before even the first breath. Eventually, your presence alone becomes enough. Some would-be challengers freeze when they meet your eyes. One drops his weapon. Another turns pale and stumbles away without drawing. One tale says a man fainted outright when you looked at him. Another version says all you did was raise an eyebrow. You also begin attracting followers. Not true disciples. Not yet. But young men who drift after you from village to village. Curious, hungry-eyed boys who hope to absorb something by proximity. You don't teach. Not formally. But when they mimic your morning drills in the distance, you pretend not to see. One in particular stands out. A wiry boy with oversized ears and a stubborn jaw. He follows you for 3 days without speaking. Eventually, you stop, hand him a stick, and say, "If you can dodge this, you can stay." He does. Barely. You nod. He follows. Still unnamed. Meanwhile, others build schools. They write books. They wear fine robes and give lectures on proper technique. You remain barefoot, eating miso soup with your fingers, writing notes on scraps of cloth or the backs of rice paper wrappers. Yet your style spreads. Quietly. People begin calling it Nitanichiryu. The two-sword style. Your movements are copied. Your footwork studied. Rumors bloom, some say you can split arrows mid-flight. Others claim you meditate underwater. A few whisper that you've never aged since your first duel. You never confirm anything. You never deny it either, you just keep moving. Eventually, you face an opponent unlike any before. Shishido Baiken. A man who wields the kusarigama. A sickle chained to a heavy weight. It's an unpredictable, dangerous weapon. One built on timing and deception. You accept the duel without hesitation. You don't win with speed or brute force. You win by noticing the subtle twitch in his shoulder before he swings. You trap the chain with your short sword, step inside the arc of his attack, and strike. Not a killing blow. Just enough to disarm. Just enough to end it, he bows. You nod. You part ways, something begins to change in you again. The fear that once made your blood sing now feels distant. The adrenaline that used to electrify your nerves fades faster. You are not bored. But you are evolving. What intrigues you now is unpredictability. The unscripted. You begin to watch dancers. Acrobats. Street performers. Anyone whose body defies logic. You study them. You mimic them. One night, you spend 4 hours imitating a drunk man's stumble. The next morning, you use that exact motion to dodge a precise strike. It works. And it teaches you more than any scroll ever has. Fights are no longer fights. They are riddles. Movements become language. Life becomes kata, and fame, though you never seek it, finds you anyway. An invitation arrives. From the court of the Hosokawa clan. They want you. Not just as a swordsman. But as a strategist. A teacher. A thinker. You do not answer immediately, instead, you climb a mountain. You sit alone. You eat bark and snow. You carve diagrams into frozen earth. You watch the way hawks circle and dive. You listen to the silence inside your ribs, then you come down. Your eyes quieter. Your limbs leaner. You nod your answer, yes, but only with conditions. You will teach. But only those who are ready to learn your way. You will write. But only when the words arrive like breath. You will fight. But only when it matters, because you are no longer just a boy with 2 sticks and a chip on his shoulder. You are no longer a storm with legs, you are becoming something else. You are becoming Miyamoto Musashi, and soon, very soon, the duel that will define your legend will rise on the horizon. But first, there is a boat to carve. You sit beside a stream, knees bent, hands steady, a knife working slowly through pine. The blade shaves long curls from the wood, and each motion is deliberate. Not rushed. Not careless. You're carving a wooden or from a heavy, knotted slab. Not a sword. Not a staff. Not some clever weapon masked in disguise. Just a boat paddle. Long, smooth. Slightly curved along the grain. It catches the morning light like polished bone. You run your palm down the handle. You sand the edges with a flat river stone until it glides over your skin without a snag. You swing it once. Then again. Testing its weight. Feeling its balance. You hold it like a sword, not because it needs to be won, but because in your hands. Everything becomes a blade. It looks absurd, and yet, it feels exactly right. You don't smile. That's never really been your habit. But something stirs behind your eyes. A flicker. A shadow of thought that says, yes. This will do. You're not making a weapon. You're making a message. And you know exactly who it's meant for. The man you're preparing to face is no ordinary opponent. He is the opponent. The culmination of every path you've walked. Sasaki Kojiro. A name spoken with both reverence and fear. They call him the demon of the western provinces. He is elegant. Calculated. Beautiful in the way a falling hawk is beautiful, focused, fast, deadly. He is known for his signature strike. The swallow cut. A movement so fluid, so impossibly quick, it is said to mirror the motion of a bird's wings mid-flap. He built a reputation on precision. On the artistry of destruction, his sword, the Manahashizo, is nearly as long as he is tall. Too long for most. But he wields it with ease. With grace. Like it's an extension of his spine, and you. You're a lean, sun-browned wanderer, perpetually barefoot, wielding a hand-carved oar and the calm of someone who has already accepted every possible outcome. Perfect. The duel is set to take place on Ganryujima. A narrow island, crescent-shaped, a sliver of sand drifting between two coasts like a brushstroke on water. It is quiet. Serene. The kind of place where peace feels natural. The kind of place that holds its breath for violence. News travels fast. The duel draws attention like fire draws moths. Scribes whisper. Warriors place bets. Children climb trees for a better view. They say this match will be one for the ages, the court swordsman in silk versus the wild ghost of the mountains. You are to arrive by boat. The duel is scheduled for dawn. Kojiro arrives early. Of course he does. He steps onto the sand dressed in dark blue, his hair tied perfectly. Every motion rehearsed. His blade gleams in the morning light. He walks the shore like a man already composing the story of his victory. He is timing his breaths. Measuring his distance. Waiting for a clean, glorious end, and you oversleep, at least, that's what people say. Some historians argue that you spent the morning in quiet meditation, sitting cross-legged as the sun warmed your back. Others claim you ate a slow breakfast and watched the waves roll in. There are even those who insist you simply forgot the hour. What no one agrees on is the reason, but when you finally appear, the sun is already climbing. Its light spills over the island like a second tide. Kojiro sees you. His face tightens. You step out of the boat barefoot, the oar resting easily on your shoulder like a walking stick. You're unhurried. Calm. The paddle catches the wind and whistles faintly. The crowd reacts with a rustle of gasps. Some scoff. Some grin. Some simply fall silent. Kojiro is not amused. He accuses you of disrespect. Of mockery. He demands seriousness. Honor. You say nothing. Words aren't needed. You keep walking up the beach, quiet as surf, your oar dragging a thin line in the sand. Your eyes stay on his. You study his posture. His grip. The way his shoulder tenses slightly with each breath. He's off balance already. The duel begins. Kojiro moves first. As expected. He is quick. Sharp. His blade arcs through the air like lightning drawn from the sea. His signature strike, the swallow cut, flies toward your temple with terrifying beauty. You step aside. Not far. Just enough, the oar comes up in a single, fluid motion. It swings. Connects, the sound is dull. Not dramatic. Just a deep, hollow crack that echoes across the shoreline. Kojiro's knees buckle. His body folds. He collapses in the sand like a silk robe cut from its hanger, and you don't gloat. You don't shout. You don't wait for applause, you turn. Walk back to the boat. One step at a time. The wind pulls gently at your sleeves. Behind you, the crowd doesn't know whether to cheer or stay quiet. They have witnessed something strange. Something precise. Something final. It is done. The legend of Ganryujima is born in that moment. Stories take flight like birds flushed from the trees. Some say you carved the oar only hours before the duel. Others claim you stayed up all night, listening to the wind, perfecting its weight. Some insist your late arrival was a strategy to unnerve Kojiro. That it worked before you ever raised a hand. That your strike broke his skull. That he never saw it coming. There are whispers that you wept after, others say you laughed, but you did neither. You simply stepped back into the boat, your eyes steady, as the waves rolled in and erased every footprint you left behind. After Ganryujima, something shifts. You no longer need to prove anything. The world has seen what you are capable of. You have answered every challenge. You have carved your name into the story of your country. And yet, the challenges continue. Young men still come, knocking on temple doors. Waiting outside the inns. Hoping for a duel. Or a lesson. Or even a glance. You ignore most of them. Fame does not feed you. Glory does not sharpen your mind. What draws you now is refinement. Simplicity. Stillness. Time begins to press gently on your shoulders. Your strength remains, but your joints ache when it rains. Old wounds tug when you move too fast. The body begins to whisper limits. But your mind sharpens in their place. You begin to write, not just notes. Not diagrams on cloth or corners of scrolls. You begin a true manuscript. You call it Dakodo, the path of aloneness. It is not a guide to swordplay. It is not about stances or cuts or timing. It is about living. About clarity. About understanding what truly matters. You write, accept everything just the way it is. You write, do not seek pleasure for its own sake. You write, do not hold on to possessions you no longer need. They are not rules. They are reflections. You leave them behind not as commandments, but as lanterns for those who might walk similar paths in darker times. And then you paint. Brushwork demands something different from you. Precision without tension. Grace without strain. You discover that the stroke of a brush reveals more than any duel. If your heart is unsettled, the ink spreads. If your breath is rushed, the lines tremble. You learn that peace is not the absence of chaos. It is the ability to stay still while chaos stirs all around. You paint cranes. You paint waves. You paint dragons coiled in clouds. One day, you paint an eggplant with such gravity that it stares back at you. Critics argue over your art. Some call it coarse. Others call it raw. One scholar describes your calligraphy as discipline made visible. You don't argue, you begin accepting students again. This time, with intent. You do not call them. They find you. You test them gently, strangely. You hand them a broom and watch how they sweep. You ask them to stand in the rain without moving. Most leave. A few stay. To them, you teach more than strikes. You teach perception. Patience. Precision of thought. You teach one thing again and again, the enemy is not the man before you. It is the weakness inside you. There are still occasional duels. You do not chase them, but when they come, you do not run. You disarm. You humiliate. You let your opponents walk away with their lives and their lesson, one evening, beneath a full moon. A man you once defeated returns. He has become a teacher. He bows. Thanks you. Says that losing to you reshaped his life. You nod, quietly. Then lift a hand and point to a pine tree leaning in the wind. See how it bends, you say. That is how you survive. He does, the world around you begins to change. The age of swords begins to close. War quiets. Peace, delicate as silk, starts to take hold. Samurai become clerks. Steel becomes symbol. Strategy becomes speech, you remain apart. A figure at the edge. Watching, you move into a cave outside Kumamoto. Ryugando. It is damp. Cold. Still. You bring nothing but paper, ink, a few brushes, and your thoughts, and the oar. You still keep it near, inside the stone quiet, you begin your final work, the Book of 5 Rings. A distillation of everything you've seen, felt, tested, and refined. You divide it into 5 parts. Earth. Water. Fire. Wind. Void. Earth is your foundation, water is your adaptability, fire is your ferocity, wind is your critique of other schools. Void is the mystery. The truth that cannot be named, you write slowly. With presence. Like a blade drawing across paper, when it is done, you are older than you expected to be. You have survived battles, loneliness, the passage of time, and your own doubts. Now, you wait, not for a challenger, not for praise, for clarity, because the truest sword, you now understand, was never in your hands, it has always lived in your mind. You are not dead. Not yet. But the air in the cave wraps around you like the breath of someone who nearly could be. It carries the scent of wet stone, old straw, and ink left open too long. There is the faint must of something lived in, something fading. Not decay exactly. More like the quiet smell of something that knows it is close to being finished. Ryugando is your home now. If it can be called a home. A shallow stone mouth in the mountain, barely large enough to stand in fully upright. The air inside is cool year-round, with a constant trickle of wind that brushes your ankles even in summer. Echoes hover in the corners, soft ones, like voices waiting to be spoken. You've made a small shelter here. Your mat is woven from rush grass and old rice sacks, pressed flat by time and your own spine. Your ink brushes hang from a splinter of bamboo pinned into the rock. Scrolls form small leaning towers around you, their edges curled from damp, their corners soft from years of turning. You still sleep facing the entrance. Always. One eye half-lidded. One hand never far from the hilt of a stick or blade or branch. A habit you never lost, not even now, when there are fewer who come with challenges. Or questions. Or swords. There is something unfamiliar about not being hunted, it curls around your shoulders like an ill-fitting robe. You can feel it in the bones of your back, in the strange lightness of your chest. As though some tight wire inside you has begun to slacken. You did not expect peace to arrive like this. You do not entirely trust it. It does not feel like a reward. It feels like a silence you didn't ask for, pressing gently from every side, and yet, you do not resist, instead, you lean in. The days stretch long and unbroken. Hours slide past like slow rain. You wake before the sun touches the mouth of the cave. Not for training. Those mornings are gone. You rise instead to listen. You listen to how birds shift in the trees before they lift into flight. To how one drop of water lands every 11 seconds near the back wall of the cave. You count your breaths between heartbeats. You count the heartbeats between thoughts. Stillness is your practice now, not the polished stillness of monks lined up in rows, draped in robes and perfect posture. Your stillness is messier. More honest. You sit with your own memories and let them echo. You let them roll across the floor like loose stones. One by one, and there are many, you think often of the boy you once were. Tekizo. Dirty feet. Split lip. Rage in your throat like a swallowed ember. You remember the day someone spoke your name with awe rather than terror. You remember how it thrilled you. And how it also left you strangely empty. There are names you keep inside now. You do not speak them aloud. Arima Kihei. Yoshioka Denshikairo. Sasaki Kojiro. Not because you carry guilt anymore. That burden has burned off in other fires. You do not name them because you do not want them to linger. You do not want to summon them into the cave, into the night, into the silence. You believe you gave each of them what they came to find. And now, they are gone. Still, when your eyes close, you see the smallest things. Not battles. Not blood. But flickers. The slight shift of a shoulder. A foot twisting in gravel. A breath paused too long. Your mind replays these moments like old prayers. Not regrets. Not ghosts. Just lessons, so you draw. You wake some mornings and reach for your brush before your legs. You paint before the light fully arrives. With no intention. With no plan. A mountain that leans like it is listening. A horse with eyes like knives. A fire that curls into shapes only you understand. One morning, you paint a hawk mid-landing. But there is no branch beneath its talons. The bird floats above nothing. You stare at it for hours, then throw it into the fire. The younger version of you would have tried again. Would have forced it to make sense. The older version lets it burn. You start receiving visitors again, not many. Not often. Mostly they are young men. Wide-eyed. Eager. They carry rumors and scrolls and questions. They are students of students, or sons of those who once watched you duel. They come hoping for wisdom. They come hoping to stand where you stand. You do not send them away, but you do not welcome them either. You let them show themselves. Some bow. Some bluster. Some simply wait. Occasionally, you give them tasks. You hand one a stick and point to a pile of dust. Sweep, you say. One boy, nervous but bold, asks, "How does sweeping make me a better swordsman?" You look at him, not unkindly, and answer, "If you cannot control a broom, why would you deserve a blade?" He leaves that same evening. You return to your writing. The book of 5 rings grows, page by page. The scrolls are no longer diagrams or drills. They are riddles. Parables. You write that a warrior must mirror water, shapeless, silent, adaptable, and impossible to strike cleanly. You write that victory is not a goal. It is a condition. A posture of readiness that never stiffens. You write something else too. A line you circle more than once: beware of becoming a sword without a purpose. You know that not all who read it will understand. You know that many will misinterpret it. Some will seek tricks. Some will twist your words into tools. But you do not write for them. You are not preserving a legacy. You are preserving a clarity you only found after a lifetime of noise, and clarity, you've come to learn, has its own weight. It wears at the bones. Slowly. Quietly, your body begins to fray. First, your shoulder dulls. Then your right knee stiffens. Cold mornings come with aches that take hours to shake. Your hands tremble slightly when you hold a cup. Some days your vision slips sideways, especially when the sky turns gray. You still eat. But food is no longer a joy. It is a ritual. Bowls of rice. A few pickled plums. Weak tea brewed 3 times too long. You know what is happening. You have seen men fall to blades. You have seen men crumble from within. You have seen yourself bleed from wounds that should have ended you, yet did not. But this is something different. This is not a wound. This is not surrender. This is the slow, quiet folding of something that has finished its shape. You go back to the Dakota, your own creed. You revise a few lines. Not the spirit, just the words. You polish them. You sharpen their edges with care. One phrase catches you again and again. Do not fear death. You read it under your breath. You whisper it against the stone. You sit with it until the meaning settles into your ribs. You are not afraid. You are simply confirming the truth of it. One night, lightning cuts across the sky like a blade slicing the clouds. The wind shoves at the mouth of the cave. Trees outside bend like they are bowing. You sit just inside, not sheltered fully, not exposed either. That old feeling rises in your chest. The one you used to feel just before a duel. The pulse. The tremble. The heat, but now, it arrives without urgency. There is no opponent, no challenge, just the storm. You bow to it. Barely. A tilt of the spine. Enough. There are those who say you died here, in Riogando. Some say you left your body seated, upright, sword resting beside you, face turned to the east. Others whisper you disappeared into the hills one last time. Becoming more myth than man, what is certain is this: you vanish from the record with the same quiet that marked your life's end. No parade. No carved tomb. No weeping disciples gathered around a fire. What remains are your words. Your paintings. Your strange, subtle way of holding a sword that no one else has ever truly matched. You slip from man to myth. In time, businessmen will quote you. Novels will borrow your name. Games will shape avatars in your image. Some will call you the greatest to ever wield a blade. Others will scoff and say you were just lucky. Just brutal. Just clever. You will not correct them, because you are gone, not broken, just complete, and somewhere. In a mountain cave lined with paper and silence, the last drops of ink from your final scroll have only just begun to dry. You walk again, not with ease. Not with the confident pace that once marked your younger years. Your legs are slower now, your balance more cautious, and each step carries within it the weight of every other step you've ever taken. But in your mind, the journey continues. You move inward. You walk through the terrain of your own history, treading carefully through each memory, each mistake, each battle scarred into your bones. And somehow, in this stillness that stretches around you like a second skin, the act of remembering becomes its own form of motion. It is in this silent wandering that you begin to uncover what was buried long ago. You remember the assassin. Sent by a rival clan. Poorly trained and even more poorly paid. He could not have been more than 20. His sword shook in his hands as he tried to lift it, the blade clearly too long, too heavy for his arms. He was frightened, yes, but it was not fear of death you saw in his eyes. It was something else. Something that made you hesitate. You took him down in moments, disarmed him without effort, pressed your blade to his throat. But then you stopped. You let him run. He didn't look back. He didn't say thank you. He just vanished down the road, stumbling into the brush. Even now, you sometimes wonder what became of him. Whether he found another purpose. Whether he ever stopped running. You remember the young woman in the dojo. She came dressed in a boy's robe, hair bound messily, voice sharp as flint. She never explained herself, and you never asked. Her determination was like a sword that had already been forged. She trained harder than any of the men, took hits without complaint, practiced until her knuckles split and bled. There was something wild in her eyes, something feral and unyielding. Then, one day, she was gone. No goodbye. No note. Just silence. Years later, someone claimed she was seen in Osaka, commanding a squad of bodyguards with the presence of a general. You want to believe that part is true. You choose to believe it, and then there is that one peculiar afternoon. A traveling actor approached you in the street, theatrical even without a stage. He asked, no, demanded, that you choreograph a fight for his next play. You refused. He insisted. After some time, you gave in, mostly out of curiosity. You spent the day teaching him how to fall safely, how to move with intent, how to create the illusion of risk. That night, you sat in the crowd and watched strangers gasp and applaud at violence performed without harm. It was the first time you realized that people could love the shape of combat without needing its consequence. These memories do not chase you. They do not linger like ghosts. They do not accuse. Instead, they soften the edges of who you have become. They arrive without warning and leave just as quietly, like visitors who do not overstay their welcome. And in their quiet presence, you feel something gentle forming within you. Not guilt. Not pride. Just understanding. You begin writing again. Not essays. Not scrolls. But letters. Letters to no one. Letters to everything. You write to the boy you were. To the men you faced. To the trees that gave you shade, to the rivers that almost carried you away. Your brush moves slowly. The words are simple. You do not aim for beauty. You aim for truth. One letter begins, I used to think victory meant standing while the other man fell. Now I think victory means not needing to stand at all. Another reads, there were days I hoped someone would stop me. No one ever did. That was both the proof of my strength and the root of my wound. You have no plans to keep these letters. There is no address to send them to. So, one by one, you burn them at the entrance to the cave. The flames catch easily. The smoke curls upward, thin and fragrant, like confessions lifted toward a sky that does not judge. Then, one morning, you wake to find your hands shaking. Not slightly. Not briefly. Your brush slips as you try to write. The ink spreads like a wound across the page. You stare at the ruined scroll for a long time. But the old frustration is gone. You do not curse. You do not try to save it. You simply breathe and accept what your body is telling you. You step outside, the morning air is thick with mist. Dew clings to the grass like a second skin. The mountains crouch on the horizon, cloaked in fog, quiet as monks at prayer. You sit on a flat stone and turn your face toward the rising sun. The warmth touches your skin gently, like a familiar hand. And in that moment, you think a thought you have not allowed yourself to think in years, I am ready, but the world is not finished with you yet. A knock sounds at the mouth of the cave. Clear. Sudden. Unmistakable. You blink. No one knocks here. Not in this place, not in this way. Most who visit come silently, bowing before they step into the shadows. This one knocks. You rise slowly, every joint making itself known. You walk to the entrance and see him standing there. A young man. His clothes are plain, his cloak thin, his posture awkward. He bows, low but shaky, as though his body is unsure whether it belongs here. I have come to challenge you, he says, voice tight with nerves. You study him for a moment. He is barely older than you were when you faced Arima Kihei. His grip on the sword is hesitant, but not entirely wrong. He is not arrogant. He is not foolish. He is afraid, but it is the kind of fear that is chasing something deeper. You sigh, quietly, you do not want this, you say. He swallows hard. I do. Because if I never test myself against you, I'll never know who I am. That answer. The echo of your younger self, folded into the face of another, you nod once, step aside, and gesture for him to enter. No swords, you say, he blinks, confused. But, no swords, you repeat, you hand him a broom, he hesitates, but accepts it, you take one for yourself. And together, without speaking, you begin to sweep. Dust rises in soft spirals. Leaves rustle across the floor. The light that filters through the cracks above dances over the walls, gold and flickering. The boy moves stiffly at first, then more naturally. His breathing evens. His grip loosens. His stance adjusts, you say nothing. When the sweeping is done, he turns to you, panting softly, eyes wide with confusion. I don't understand, he whispers. You offer him a small smile, you will. He bows again. Lower this time. Longer. Then he gathers his things and leaves without another word. You never see him again, but you know that the memory will remain. The lesson, whatever form it takes, will stay with him. And that, in the end, is enough. You return to your scrolls. You write the final passages of the Book of Five Rings. Your hands are slower now. But your strokes are deliberate, anchored in intention. Each line carries the weight of finality. Not just for the book. For your life, in the last scroll, the fifth and final one, void, you write, in the void is virtue, and no evil. Wisdom has existence, principle has existence, the way has existence, spirit is nothingness. You pause, you read it aloud, the words echoing softly against the stone, then you stop, the writing is finished, you roll the scrolls slowly. Bind them with thin cord. Place them beside your sword. Not because they are the same, but because they were never truly separate. That night, your dreams are made of water. You stand knee-deep in a river, arms open, eyes closed. The current surrounds you, nudging, pulling, flowing. It does not knock you over. You are not resisting. You are not struggling, you are becoming. When morning arrives, you wake to stillness so complete it startles you. Your hands do not shake. Your breath is steady. Your thoughts are clear, you rise, you dress without ceremony, you place the scrolls in a wooden box you carved long ago, you sit, cross-legged, at the mouth of the cave, facing the east, and you wait, not for death, for stillness, complete. You do not speak for 3 days, not from pain. Not from fatigue. Not because your throat is cracked or your voice has failed you. The silence comes for a different reason. It arrives like a companion, not a condition. You find yourself with nothing left to say. No sentence remains urgent. No thought demands translation into words. Language has run its course, completed its long duty. The sword has spoken where language could not, and now even the sword has fallen silent. So you sit, unmoving, at the mouth of Riagando. The cave, once a refuge for retreat and thought, becomes something else entirely. No longer a mere shelter. No longer a hiding place. It begins to feel sacred. As though the stone has absorbed your breath and stilled itself to match your rhythm. It becomes a shrine. A space not for battle, not for hiding, but for reverence. For ending, silence hangs around your shoulders like a garment. Not new. Not stiff. But softened and shaped by time, like fabric worn thin by use and memory. You wear it easily. It suits you more than any formal robe ever could. You let it drape and gather around your feet as if it were always meant to be part of you. Birds keep chattering as if nothing has changed. The trees sway gently, letting the wind pass through them without concern. The mountain does not notice your stillness, and neither do the clouds. It is only people who mistake silence for absence. Only people who find stillness unsettling. But there are no people now. No footsteps across the moss. No voices bouncing from stone to stone. Only the hush of wind through leaves, a sound like monks murmuring in distant corners of an unseen temple. In that hush, your thoughts begin to stretch. They do not return to the past with longing. They do not chase nostalgia. They return with intention. As if summoned. You begin to sort the memories of your childhood, not as a man looking for comfort, but as a warrior laying out his tools for inspection. What made you? What marked you? What endured, and what was merely noise? You remember your father. His voice was short, always clipped at the ends. Words were measured, never wasted. His teachings came more from what he withheld than from what he offered. He shaped you not through warmth but through steel. He sharpened you. Tempered you. But he never taught you softness. He never taught you rest. And then he disappeared. Perhaps he died. Perhaps he walked away. You heard stories. Some said he fell in battle. Others said he chose to vanish. You never searched deeply. You told yourself it did not matter. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was knowing the truth already. He believed emotion was dangerous. He told you the blade must never quiver. He said that control was the heart of mastery. He was not wrong. But he never showed you how to live when the blade was no longer in your hand. That knowledge, the art of pausing, the strength it takes to stand still, you had to learn on your own. You remember the village after your first kill. The silence that greeted your return. No celebration. No welcome. Just the eyes of neighbors avoiding yours. A kind of quiet dread. As though you had stepped out of one world and into another, and they could no longer follow. Their gazes asked questions they could not speak aloud. For years, those eyes remained. Watching you through training, through trials, through duels and dinners. Always the same quiet question, are you proud of what you have become? You never had an answer. But now, that question no longer disturbs you. It has become another stone in the stream, still there, but no longer impeding the flow. Outside, the weather continues to change. It always has. Rain falls without ceremony. The cave mouth grows dark with moisture, the stone gleaming like wet ink. The air becomes heavier. Time begins to feel tangible, as if it were pressing gently but persistently against your bones. Your movements slow. Not from reluctance, but from gravity. As though the world itself is asking you to stay in place. Your joints ache, but they do not protest. They murmur. You eat little. A small bowl of rice. A sliver of pickled plum. A sip of tea. Hunger no longer commands you. You remember hunger, but only as memory. It no longer arrives, yet you are not in mourning, you feel lighter. Not just in body, but in identity. The figure known as Musashi the warrior begins to loosen. He fades like steam. In his place remains someone quieter. Someone who observes rather than performs. Someone who no longer needs to be seen. You become the witness. And witnessing is enough. Still, something within you remains alert, the sword stay nearby. Not out of fear. Not out of superstition. But because they belong to you. They are no longer weapons. They are extensions. Like ribs. Like breath. You do not reach for them. But your body remembers how to. Your mind does not relax fully. It has been trained against that. The habit of readiness is too deep. Survival came at the cost of vigilance. Endurance was purchased with tension. Your hands remember everything. Occasionally, letters arrive. Carried by travelers with tired feet and wide eyes. Bits of news cling to them like dust. Japan changes again. Peace becomes policy. The Tokugawa hold grows stronger. The warrior class drifts toward ceremony. Men in armor now write ledgers. Swords hang as decorations. Battles become stories. You hear this, and you do not curse it. You do not grieve. You only nod. The change is not betrayal. It is rhythm. Still, you wonder. What will become of your teachings? Will they be read? Will they be flattened into symbols? Reduced to diagrams? Recited by mouths that have never known battle? Explained by those who cannot feel the weight of steel in their palms? You do not answer those questions. You never did. You trust that the right ones will understand. The rest can treat your words as poetry and be no worse for it. One afternoon, you lift your bakken. The wooden blade that has remained with you longer than some memories. It feels unfamiliar. Not foreign, but changed. Heavy with time. Heavy with what it once meant. Your hand trembles slightly. You lower the sword, gently. Not out of defeat. Out of recognition. Out of gratitude. It rests on the floor. You look at it and see not a tool of war, but a mark of time. You breathe in, and you release. At night, dreams visit more vividly. They no longer carry the sting of combat. They bring faces. People you did not know you had kept. The boy who followed you, always with questions. The woman in Kyoto with sour plums and steady eyes. The old monk who demanded 3 days of sweeping before speaking. They all return. Silent. Steady. Present. You do not know if they come as blessings or as witnesses. But you welcome them. In the day, you speak softly to yourself. You repeat the words you once taught others. Not to remind, but to remember. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Resentment and complaint are appropriate neither for oneself nor for others. Step by step, walk the 1,000-mile road. The last one echoes longer. You speak it again before sleep. You are not certain where it began. It could have come from your father. Or from a stranger. Or from a younger version of yourself, spoken into the wind. The scrolls are complete. The ink has set. The final letters are cold. The visitors are gone. Even the birds hesitate now before they sing near the cave. It is almost time, but not quite. You feel the last lesson beginning. It does not break the silence. It does not burst into flame. It rises slowly, like a tide washing over old stone. You do not resist. One morning, light moves across the cave. A thin beam finds its way to the far wall. It lands on a charcoal sketch. One you do not remember drawing. 2 swords, crossed mid-air. Crooked. Childlike. Alive, you rise. You approach. You place your fingers on the lines. The charcoal smudges slightly. It is not elegant. It is not refined. But it breathes, and in that moment, you understand, this is the final teaching. The world was never the opponent. The battle was always within. The restless self. The flame that refused to settle. And now you have won, not by attacking. But by pausing, not by declaring. But by listening, not by racing ahead. But by noticing each place your foot has touched. Your pulse is slow. Each beat like a bell in the morning. You walk to the cave's entrance. There is no ceremony. No final word. No farewell, only breath. You place your swords in front of you, you fold your hands, and you wait, not for death, for nothing, because nothing more is required. Everything has already happened. You have always known how to wait, not in the passive way of folded arms or idle thoughts, but in the way a seasoned hunter knows to breathe with the forest. You waited with every fiber attuned, every heartbeat calibrated to silence. You have waited beneath canopies of leaves, body pressed flat to the earth, breath so shallow it vanished into the moss. You have waited on muddy hillsides for opponents who might never arrive. You have waited beside still rivers at dawn, watching for the shimmer of a ripple that would mark the beginning. And you have waited in duels, eyes fixed on the trembling edge of another man's breath, poised between movement and hesitation. You have waited for the unspoken moment. For that perfect fragment of rhythm, for the invisible aperture between two beats when the world tilted in your favor. Patience was not a delay for you. It was an action. It was a stance. It was a weapon, and now, seated in the mouth of the cave, your bones weathered and your joints stiff, your mind honed and unwavering as the edge of your sharpest blade, you wait once more. But not for death, you wait for stillness to reach its destination. To settle not only into your limbs, but into the narrow places within you. Into the spaces between your thoughts. Into the air in your lungs and the marrow within your hands. Before you, your swords lie undisturbed in the dust and soft light. They have not changed. Not in shape. Not in purpose. Yet time has softened their presence. The katana, long and slender, once flickered like a bolt of held lightning. Its edge had known many things: pine wood, bone, wind, flesh, and rain. The wakizashi, its smaller counterpart, carried a different set of stories. It had been drawn in hallways where space vanished. In shadows. In moments where instinct surged forward before reason had time to follow. The scars on each blade are still visible. You could name the reasons for every nick, every scratch. You see them now not as damage, but as memory. Every line a record. Every dent a page. You used to clean them weekly, sometimes more. Not to polish them for others. Not as ornament. You cleaned them as ritual. To remember. To stay connected. To remind yourself that these were not trophies. They were extensions of your life. Companions. Holding them steady was how you kept your mind steady. Honoring them was how you kept yourself from becoming careless, but this week, your hands have not reached for them at all. And now, there is a fine film of dust beginning to gather along the flat of the blades. Not thick. Not coarse. Just a gentle layer. Like the way snow gathers on temple roofs. A quiet covering. Not a sign of neglect. Not a warning. A gesture. A softening. A younger version of yourself might have gasped at the sight. Might have snatched up a cloth, heart quick, hand faster, to erase the intrusion of time. But not now. Now, you smile faintly. A small thing. A recognition: even a blade deserves its rest. Even a weapon, after years of being held tense and ready, is allowed to fall still. It too has earned a breath. Your body no longer resists the truth of time. It presents you with evidence each day. Your knees are slower to bend. Your spine protests movement in long, careful murmurs. Your shoulders do not bear weight the way they once did. And your right hand, once the first to move in a fight, now trembles when you lift a teacup. You, who once struck faster than thought, now pause to button a robe. There is effort in everything now. And even effort is beginning to fade. You could call for help. Not far from here, men still wait. Retainers of the Hosokawa clan. They are stationed nearby. They arrive when summoned, though you almost never summon them. When they do appear, they speak softly. They lower their heads. They still call you titles you never asked for. Strategist. Master. Philosopher. Warrior in residence. But you refused the appointments. You declined the formalities. You asked for space. You asked for quiet. And eventually, they listened. They began to treat you like something permanent. Not active. Not demanding. but present. Like a stone basin in a garden. Not meant to be used. Only to be acknowledged, and truthfully, you were never one for crowds. Even now, solitude does not weigh on you. It feels like completion. Like a path finally reaching its destination. Your mind is not empty, but it is free. There are no intrusions. Only visitations. Memories arrive unbidden. You remember laughter. Not polite laughter. Not the kind shared between nobles at banquets. The kind that came without warning, rough and genuine. You remember a farmer's wife in Higo province who trounced you at Go. She accused you of cheating. You accused her of witchcraft. She hurled a pickled radish at your head. You laughed until your ribs ached and your students stared, wide-eyed and startled. In that moment, you were not legend. You were not invincible. You were only human. And it felt like relief. You remember running toward a storm. Not for shelter. Not out of fear. But into it. Your robe soaked, sandals left behind. The thunder rolled like drums. Your feet carried you into the torrent, before your mind could explain why. You were drenched, shivering, grinning. You remember the weight of the water in your sleeves. And the feeling of being clean. You remember trying to catch a fish in a river with your bare hands. You slipped. You cursed. You flailed. A boy nearby watched, then handed you one of his fish without a word. You refused it. Then accepted it. Then taught him how to escape a two-handed grip, while he held his fish proudly, still flapping. These are the memories that remain. Not the scrolls. Not the statistics of your victories. Not the temple halls echoing your name. What stays are the small absurdities. The off-balance moments. The reminders that you were once surprised by joy. That you were, despite everything, alive. People still wonder whether you ever loved. Not in theory, but in truth. Whether anyone ever saw behind the reputation. They speak of a noblewoman in Edo. Of rumors. Of a child. You offered no confirmations. You let the stories multiply like petals in the wind. You believed love was not soft. It was not a detour. It was a discipline of its own. You once wrote, "Do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love." And yet, people said your eyes softened when you saw children. That once, you hid a kitten in your sleeve and carried it for miles until it could be adopted by a village girl. You were always more than the stories, but not many wanted to see the full picture. Now, no one is watching. And so, for the first time in a long time, you let the armor fall. You sit without structure. Not upright like the monks. Not rigid with ceremony. You sit simply. You let your eyes fall half-closed. You let the breath flow as it chooses. You listen. You hear the wind weaving itself through the stone of the cave. You follow it. You let it lead. Your thoughts rise. You do not chase them. You do not name them. You let them go, then something shifts. You feel it, a lightness. It is not an idea. Not a metaphor. It is physical. It is in your shoulders. It is in your ribs. It is in your chest, which no longer feels wrapped in iron. The weight has lifted. The burden you carried through decades of motion, of discipline, of caution, it is gone. Not because you set it down. Because it set you down, you open your eyes, the cave glows with evening. The light is not sharp. It is golden, brushed across the stone like the softest paint. It touches everything without claiming anything. You know this light. You have seen it before. Before fights. After walks. In the faces of men who knew the hour was near, but this time, it does not speak of ending, it speaks of return. You are not afraid, not of death. Not of vanishing. Not of being misread, you are still. And stillness feels right, your hands rest easily. Your heart moves without rush. You have said what needed saying. You have walked the road. You have fallen. You have risen. You have listened. You have waited. And now, at last, you allow it all to fade. Not from surrender. From readiness, the moment approaches. You do not greet it. You do not name it. You let it come as it chooses. It does not crash. It arrives like mist. There are stories, that you died seated, facing the rising sun, that your final words were found half-written beside your sword. No one can be sure, but this is what you felt. Stillness, not a void. Not silence, stillness, the kind that follows rhythm. The kind that welcomes breath. The kind that remains after the body is gone. You are not Musashi the Ronin, you are not the tactician. Not the duelist. Not the man of ink or brush or blood, you are rhythm now, a breath in the world's quiet song, and as your final exhale slips into the mountain answers, not with thunder, but with a single breath, enough to say, you are returned. It begins again, not life, but the telling of it. After your death, the world doesn't pause. The wheel continues. Leaves fall from branches in their quiet, spiraling descent. Wind moves across the hills, tugging at the grass outside the mouth of the cave where you once sat, still and watching. Birds cry out at first light, unaware that the man who listened with such quiet attention is no longer there to greet the dawn. But something stays behind. It hovers in the air like the last note of a song, something almost audible. A shape that presses gently against the earth, as if memory has weight. At first, they come alone. Travelers. Students. The curious. One by one. A man with a straw hat. A woman with a scroll tucked beneath her arm. A child trailing behind an elder, wide-eyed and silent. They approach slowly, with hesitation, standing just outside the entrance to Ryugando. Some bow. Some kneel on the damp ground, hands pressed together. Some cross their arms and simply gaze into the darkness, as if waiting for your ghost to form from the stone itself. Each of them holds a question, though they do not ask it aloud. They want something: clarity, proof, a piece of whatever you found before the end. The questions hang in the air, unanswered. Did he really fight 100 men on the same day? Was it true he carved a sword from an oar? Did he ever love someone enough to stay? The cave says nothing, but still, the visitors come, and then more. They arrive in pairs. In clusters. In quiet processions. They leave behind offerings, small coins, feathers, folded scraps of paper with ink still wet. Some light incense. Others bring stones from far-off places and place them in a careful pile, as if to mark a shared weight. The cave slowly becomes more than shelter. It becomes a shrine. Then, as the years pass, something else. A symbol. Your words begin to move. At first, they are passed hand to hand. Scrolls copied in candlelight. Pages stitched together with trembling reverence. Then those pages find their way to dojos beyond your region. Then to courts where generals read them aloud between battles. Then across the sea, to people who have never seen a katana, who do not know the scent of tatami mats or the feel of sweat on a training robe. The Book of 5 Rings begins to travel faster than footsteps. It is no longer bound to place. Or even to time. It is read by swordsmen, then by generals, then by politicians in foreign suits, then by corporate leaders in rooms of glass and light, eventually, by people who have never held a blade. Yet still feel something sharp and true settle into their chest as they turn the pages. Your scrolls become books. The books become objects. Some are bound in leather, pressed with gold. Others are printed by the thousands, cheap and pocket-sized. The translations multiply. Some are careful. Others butcher your rhythm, strip your metaphors, offer only dust in place of weight. Your name appears on bookmarks, seminars, even t-shirts. A few quote you without reading you. A few sell you without knowing what they've bought. You would probably hate that, but then again, maybe not. Once, you wrote, from one thing, no 10,000 things. And that is exactly what begins to unfold. People draw your words into their own worlds. They bring you into their boardrooms and locker rooms, their speeches and startup decks. They say your name with conviction, even as they mispronounce it. Some think you can teach them to win. Some think you can teach them to lead. A few are looking for something else entirely. Historians take sides. One group claims you were a brutal man, wrapped in poetry, who polished violence until it shined like philosophy. Others insist the reverse, that you were a philosopher, dragged reluctantly into violence, sharpening your mind on necessity. Some dismiss your legacy as self-mythology. They say you invented half the duels. That Kojiro may have survived. That your victories were written by your followers, eager for their own place in the footnotes of glory. Some say you did not even write the Book of 5 Rings yourself, that it was crafted after your death, stitched together like armor from old cloth. But none of them deny this. You changed something. You left a mark that does not fade. You are remembered not as a flawless man, but as a kind of essence. Part blade. Part brush. Part breath held at the edge of a decision. The world turns, and yet your presence holds. Like a mountain in mist, you remain visible through shifting weather. Constant. Still, new schools rise in your name. Some focus on the form. Others on the philosophy. Some teach the sword. Others teach the space between movements. Diagrams of your stance appear on scrolls, on walls, even tattooed on skin. In lands where your name was once unknown, students now speak it in reverence. They whisper it before tests, before tournaments. They believe that in knowing you, they might come closer to knowing themselves. But many miss what mattered. They see the strictness. They study your discipline. They memorize your rules. They do not hear the laughter. They miss the strange little paintings, the crooked smile behind the words, the odd letters sent to students about fish bones and cloud shapes. They forget that your silence was not absence. It was selection. A decision. Every pause you made was deliberate. Even the sword makers miss the point. They craft ornate replicas of your weapons, swords wrapped in silk, gilded with dragons, displayed behind glass. You would not have drawn them. You would have left them in the dirt and walked on. Your real swords were never for ceremony. They were not for admiration. They were for balance. For rhythm. They were tools of clarity, not decoration. Your words begin to distort under time. Slogans appear where substance once lived. Strategies are reduced to sound bites. People pull pieces from your teachings and try to turn them into tricks. They search for power instead of presence. They quote without study. They copy without understanding, but you expected this. You were not writing for everyone. Once, you said, perception is strong and sight weak. You explained how strategy lives in seeing what others overlook, how clarity requires distance, how to step back is sometimes the only way to move forward. They remember the part about killing your opponent, but forget that you were trying to teach how not to need to. Plays are written about your life. Then novels. Then films. Eventually, video games. You become a character. Taller. Cleaner. More tragic. Sometimes you fight demons. Sometimes you ride dragons. Sometimes you die in the rain while whispering poetic last words. You are amused. You are unmoved. You understood long ago that truth is only one kind of story. Legend is a different kind of tool. It does not answer. It points. It gives people something to walk toward, and yet, slowly, over time, something begins to circle back. A few read you differently. They find your pages not as instruction, but invitation. They do not rush. They train alone. They write notes in margins. They let the sword be a question. They begin to realize you were never chasing mastery, you were chasing understanding, and in that moment, they meet you, not the hero on the beach, not the monk in the cave, but the part of you that searched for balance, in everything, because that is all you ever searched for. Not power, not fame, not certainty, but rhythm, balance, form, the shape of truth as it moved, and even now, long after your breath has left the world, your rhythm remains, it echoes, in the morning quiet of a dojo, where a student swings a wooden sword alone, the floor creaking gently beneath them, in a crowded office, where a person closes their eyes and exhales slowly before choosing their words, in the hush of a cave, carved into the side of a mountain, now empty, but not silent, because in all of these moments, you are still walking. Your rhythm, yes, your rhythm, never truly dies. It does not vanish into silence, nor dissolve into dust. It does not disappear as a monument topples, nor fade like ink left too long in the sun. It simply changes shape. It moves differently now. It travels quieter routes, weaving its way through centuries like a slow, unseen river beneath stone. It does not rush. It does not demand. It slips between the folds of time like smoke curling through the cracks of old wood, lingering in the places no one thinks to search, and stirring again precisely when the timing calls for it. It waits. It listens. Then it reappears, in a modern judo class, far from the bamboo floors of ancient dojos. Under fluorescent lights that hum slightly and floors that echo with footfalls, two students circle each other on the mat. Their uniforms are crisp, their belts snug, their breathing slow. They do not cry out. There is no blood. But in the shifting of their stance, in the subtle pivot of their hips, in the silence between breaths, you are present. Not in title. Not in ritual. But in rhythm. In timing. In awareness. One student, trying to recall your name during warm-up, mispronounces it and laughs. The other shrugs. Then they continue. It does not matter. Even without saying your name correctly, they walk paths shaped by your steps. They move through a space you once knew, elsewhere. Across a wide city, in a quiet studio with rice paper doors and the scent of pine ink, a calligrapher pauses. Her hand hovers above the page. The tip of her brush trembles just slightly. She has read your scrolls, not to memorize, but to understand motion. She once tried holding a wooden sword, not to strike, but to study balance. Now, she stands still. She bows gently to the paper. Not for tradition. Not for formality. But because something in her understands the gravity of beginning. Her brush meets the page. It draws not a poem, nor a mantra, but the first line of a shopping list. And still, in the curve of her wrist, in the breath she follows as she paints the stroke, there is Musashi. Not in the words. In the way, your philosophy outlives your name, and what a name it has become, your biography now lies somewhere between truth and tale. A woven cloth of fact and fiction, of dates and dreams, so layered and knotted that even you, were you to return, might struggle to recall every thread. They say you carved a sword from a boat or when no blade could be found. They say you stood beneath icy waterfalls. Eyes shut, limbs shaking, just to feel what it meant to remain standing. They say you painted birds so tenderly that soldiers, long hardened by battle, wept to see them. They say you refused to bathe when others urged you. That you bested entire schools of warriors. That you faced death without flinching. They say many things. Some of them true. Some of them not. But all of them echo the shape of something real. Now, your name has become many things. It is an icon. An image. A symbol flattened and stretched to fit many purposes. You are a textbook figure, simplified for chapters. A silhouette printed on posters, coffee mugs, t-shirts. Your words are quoted in boardrooms, dropped into keynote addresses. Placed beside marketing slogans. People summon your name as though it were a charm. Some repeat your sayings without understanding the hand that once wrote them. Others twist your teachings, wrapping them around intentions you would never have accepted. And yet, despite the confusion, despite the noise, you are still there. Because you left behind more than strategy. More than blade positions or forms of combat. You left behind more than the stance of the feet, the angle of a strike, the grip of a handle. You left behind a pattern for seeing. For thinking. For moving. You left behind a way of walking through life with precision, with attention, with care. You did not live as a master in your own eyes. You lived as a student. A student of rhythm, of timing, of terrain. A student of change. You watched the world and adjusted. You studied failure. You learned from stillness. You did not move to win. You moved to understand. There is a story, passed between mouths like a warm bowl in winter, half true, half imagined. They say that one day, during a meal, you discovered a frog sitting in your rice bowl. You did not shout. You did not complain. You simply stared at the creature for a moment, then began to eat around it. Quietly. Carefully. The frog remained unharmed. When asked why you did not remove it, you replied, "He was here first." People laugh at the tale. They use it as a riddle, or a joke. But the story is not about the frog. It is about the vision. The choice to move within the moment, not against it. To respect what is, instead of forcing what is not. You did not see the world as a battlefield. You saw it as a river. Something to enter, to read, to join. Yes, you were once a killer. Sharp. Decisive. You entered battles that others feared to name. But over time, you changed. You became something quieter. You learned to observe. To withdraw. To offer instead of strike. You became the kind of man who could compose verses with the same hands that once gripped blood-stained hilts. A man who could teach not only by clashing swords, but by pausing mid-sentence. By leaving space for breath. Now, your rhythm travels further than your feet ever did. It has crossed oceans, entered continents where your name was once unknown. Into Korea. Into China. Into the Americas. Into nations where your language is not spoken, yet your rhythm still resonates. You are in textbooks. In classrooms. In movies. In memories of people who never saw your country, but still carry a piece of your method. You are inside digital landscapes now. Games where players select your likeness, their avatars swinging glowing swords in impossible arcs. They press buttons. They chase victories. They defeat enemies made of light. And beneath the layers of code, your rhythm flickers. Dim, but alive. Some scholars call this a tragedy. A loss. They call it dilution. They say your teachings have been hollowed out. Sold. Mocked. You have become product, but you would have smiled, quietly. Perhaps tilted your head. And asked the only question that mattered, did they learn anything? Because that was always the measure. Not their loyalty. Not their reverence. Not their praise. But their discovery, not the duel, not the destruction, the direction, and within that direction lies a truth easily missed. You did not die with bitterness in your chest. You did not cling to your swords in fear. You sat. You breathed. You folded your hands like paper. You greeted the end with calm, not because you were finished, but because you had seen enough to be content. You had come to clarity. There is another story, told quietly, in the spaces between official biographies. A disciple, kneeling beside you, voice shaking, asks, "Master, what is the final teaching?" You look at him. You do not rush. You wait. And then you say, "There is none." You must continue walking. No secret, no technique, just motion, and so the walking continues, in late-night rooms lit by single lamps, in subway cars filled with strangers, where someone chooses silence over anger. On mountaintops where snow drapes the trees, and someone listens instead of speaking, in kitchens, in studios, on sidewalks, someone faces a moment. A decision. A wait, and without knowing why, they pause, they listen, they hear something quiet behind the noise, a whisper behind the breath, a rhythm. Do not flinch, listen, move with clarity, keep walking. You are no longer a man with a sword and a name, no longer a warrior with calloused hands and unfinished poems. You are movement. You are a path beneath the feet. You are the silence that arrives before the storm. You are the calm that lingers after it. And somewhere, right now, someone lifts a wooden sword. Or a brush. Or the weight of trying once more. They do not follow behind you, they do not stand beside you, they walk with you. You have become harder to define, not merely because the centuries have worn down the finer details, smoothing the sharpness of your edges until only broad contours remain, but because from the beginning, you resisted any single description. You refused to be pinned beneath one title, one role, one neat category. Warrior? Certainly. That was evident. Artist? Without question. Monk? Almost, but not fully. Madman? Possibly, depending on the moment and who was watching. Strategist? Absolutely. But even those words, heavy with meaning, feel insufficient now. They shrink beside the shape of your life. They collapse when held against the scope of the path you carved. They are too rigid to contain the nuance. Too shallow to hold the depth. Trying to describe you now is like trying to trap the wind in closed hands. The more one tries, the more it slips through the fingers. You defied simplification. The trajectory of your life cannot be summarized in a sentence, cannot be flattened into a slogan. Every act, every pause, every movement bore the weight of intention. The choices you made, the stances you took, the breaths you measured, each one was precise, deliberate, unflinching. You never set out to become a legend. That was not the prize you pursued. You were not chasing immortality through myth. What you sought was something quieter, something smaller, but infinitely harder. You sought precision. In thought. In movement. In presence. You sought the clarity that comes not from spectacle but from the discipline of attention. You moved with purpose. You stopped with reason. There were no wasted motions. No accidental gestures. You were not trying to be remembered. You were trying to be exact, and now, with the passing of time, people reach for explanations they can manage. They repeat the polished version. Musashi was a samurai who never lost. It is a line that appears in textbooks, recited in martial arts classes, engraved on plaques, recycled in summaries. But it leaves too much behind. It reduces you to a number. It cuts away the parts that were most human. The defeats that were invisible. The kinds of loss no duel could capture. You lost things that did not draw blood. You lost belonging. You lost a father you barely had time to know. You lost companionship that could have steadied you. You abandoned comfort, familiarity, the gentle rhythm of ordinary life. And you did not lose these because they were taken from you. You gave them up. You laid them down so that your hands would be empty, so they could hold something heavier. Something formless. Something not made for display, but even so, you left signs, in the Book of 5 Rings. Deep within the fire scroll, there is a sentence almost always overlooked. It is quiet. It does not shout for attention. It is not quoted in bold ink. It does not boast. It simply reads, if you think only of winning, you will lose the rhythm. Most pass by it without pause. They look instead for the thrilling lines. The battle cries. The ones that echo with force. But this sentence holds the core. It contains the center of your thought, because the fight, for you, was never a show. It was not about dazzling with violence. It was about rhythm. About attunement. About sensing the beat beneath the clash of blades. About hearing the pause before the strike, the silence before the chaos. You read the spaces between. You learned the choreography that others didn't even know they were performing. Your victories did not come from recklessness or brute strength. They came from listening. From awareness so finely tuned it ceased to feel like effort. You trained until your adjustment became instinct. Until your perception was no longer a skill, but a state of being. That was what startled people. A warrior who saw like a poet. A fighter who moved like a musician. You wrote once, know the smallest things and the biggest things, the shallowest things and the deepest things. Many assumed you were referring to swordsmanship. Angles. Balance. The physics of killing. But perhaps it was not the blade you were speaking of. Perhaps it was people. Perhaps it was the human condition itself. Even in your most lethal moments, you did not strike with blindness. You saw your opponents. You saw them in ways they did not know how to be seen. You saw the posture they rehearsed. You saw the fear they could not hide. You saw the uncertainty beneath their pride. You understood them, not because you pitied them, but because you remembered them. Their fear lived in you once. Their hunger was your own, and that recognition, is what made you dangerous, not your speed, not your strength, but your nearness. You were close. Close to what they hoped to conceal. Close to what they had not yet named. Close to the rhythm of their mind before it caught up with itself. You met them at the edge of their awareness. You stood at the border between who they were and who they feared they might become. There are quiet stories told in reverent tones, stories that describe your final hours as stillness. Not stillness crafted for beauty, not stillness to impress or to be carved into stone, but stillness born from release. A body no longer preparing. A mind no longer rehearsing. A system finally at rest. No need for vigilance. No calculation left. Just breath. Just presence. Just being, and yet the life you left behind is not still, it moves. In Tokyo, a CEO teaches your triangle of engagement during a strategy meeting. In Sao Paulo, a sensei rebuilds his martial arts curriculum around your two-sword style, reminding his students that rhythm must come before repetition. In London, a grieving author opens each chapter with your words from the cave, using them as lanterns to light the way through sorrow. None of them claim to fully understand you. But they try. With imperfect steps, they carry you forward. They move with you, however clumsily, and yet, not all who invoke your name do so with care. There are misuses, always. Your words are printed on merchandise beside waterfalls and wolves. Your name is used to sell knives, books, self-help courses. Your duels become metaphors for business. Your strategies are twisted into tools for manipulation. Some try to turn your path into a ladder for corporate domination. Others treat your silence as a gimmick to be branded. You would have sighed at that, but maybe you would have nodded as well, because you understood something essential. Once your words left the brush, they no longer belonged to you. Once you released your teachings, they had to grow in the wild. Some would be watered. Others distorted. Some would be planted in fertile ground. Others would wither. That was not your burden. You did not write to be remembered, you wrote to remember what it means to move with awareness, to remember how to distinguish precision from cruelty, to remember that strategy is not about climbing higher, but about seeing clearer, and now that mirror, your mirror, reflects countless faces, some resemble your own. Most do not. But that never mattered. It was not about likeness. It was about willingness. About the intention to listen. About the decision to pursue rhythm even without knowing its name. About trusting the quiet. Trusting the stillness. Trusting the pause. Your cave is still there. People still visit. Some arrive with cameras, staying only long enough to say they were there. Others linger, uncertain of what they expected to find. A few kneel where you once sat, legs folded, eyes closed, reaching for something they cannot yet name. One man left behind a sword. No note. No carving. He placed it on the stone and walked away. Perhaps it was an offering, perhaps it was a question, perhaps it was both, but what mattered was not what he left behind, what mattered was what he took with him, an echo, a weight, a subtle shift deep inside, as if something ancient had turned toward him and whispered, "The fight is not outside you, the real fight is here, inside." Against comfort that disguises itself as wisdom, against fear that pretends to be clarity, against hesitation that drowns itself in certainty, you face those battles. Not occasionally. Not only when they were convenient. You face them daily, and that is what people feel when they speak your name, even if they do not understand why, not the victories, not the carved or, not the record etched into history, but the discipline, the decision, the quiet, tireless resolve to keep walking, even when the path vanished, even when the world was silent, even when your feet ached and the road ahead showed no sign, especially then. The word master is tossed around a lot these days. It floats freely from mouth to mouth, often untethered from depth or difficulty. It is applied casually, almost carelessly. It is used to describe those who have won a handful of matches, those who have completed a sequence of structured courses with certificates handed out like rewards. It is assigned to people who have published a book with a bold title printed in embossed letters, fronted by a cover designed to command attention, followed by blurbs that speak with confidence, even when the content is hesitant. The word finds its way onto resumes with a sense of pride. It is whispered in classrooms with reverence, sometimes even fear. It is etched onto plaques and engraved beneath painted portraits hung in frames, as though the honor could be captured and frozen in time, but you never sought it. You never asked for it. You never once introduced yourself as Miyamoto Musashi, Master Swordsman. You didn't need to. Titles were for ceremony. For procession. They were ornaments to be pinned on uniforms, decorations meant to satisfy a hunger for recognition. You had no interest in decoration. You had no appetite for accolades. You had no use for titles. You were too absorbed in motion, too absorbed in learning, too focused on the now. You lived inside the breath before the strike, the whistle of steel slicing through air. The pivot in your opponent's ankle, the slight tremble in the wrist that betrayed hesitation. You studied the twitch of muscle, the pattern of breath, the shift of weight before momentum. You didn't chase the word. You chased rhythm, and now, long after your bones have settled into the mountain soil, long after your body has been reclaimed by the earth, the world speaks your name with a kind of awe. You have become the gold standard of mastery. It is strange how the world works. Strange how time reshapes meaning. People look back at your life and try to fold it neatly into a story that is clean, inspirational, and easy to tell. They smooth out the rough edges and shape it into a familiar arc, the birth of a prodigy, the rise to fame, the turn toward reflection and philosophy, the quiet and poetic ending in solitude. They package your story into something that can be studied, remembered, and celebrated. But the truth of your life? It was louder. More tangled. It did not move in straight lines. It stumbled. It faltered. It took wrong turns. There were detours that no scroll recorded. There were days that passed in thick confusion, in doubt, in disappointment. There were nights spent lying awake on the floors of unfamiliar villages. Your body shivering from cold, your mind uncertain. You once broke the strap of your sandal and walked for hours barefoot, bleeding across gravel and thorn. You once offended a local lord by accident, and for 3 long days, you sent apologies through go-betweens, each message more humiliating than the last. You once slipped during a duel, your foot catching on uneven ground. You masked the stumble with a flourish so fluid and precise that no one saw the mistake. Before you mastered anything else, you learned to master recovery. Historians like clean lines. They like symmetry. They like structure. But you lived among scribbles. You lived among tangled threads and shifting paths. And yet, you followed them. You followed the crooked, looping, unpredictable path wherever it led. You followed it into caves and cities, through windswept fields and across snow-covered peaks. You kept drawing your map not with ink but with footsteps. You walked through fog, through fear, through failure. You carved your way into the unknown using rhythm as your guide and your blade. You were relentless, but not loud. Disciplined, but never boastful. When your sword was gone, you trained with a branch. When your opponents vanished, you practiced in silence. You stood alone in falling snow, letting the cold strip you of ego. You let it teach you patience. That kind of mastery rarely gets written into folk songs. But it is the only kind that lasts. The only kind that matters. There is a line in the wind scroll. One of your quieter teachings. You wrote, "To know 10,000 things, know one well." Many take it as a lesson in swordplay. They believe the secret lies in repetition. In drilling the same movement again and again until it becomes muscle memory. But the blade was never the true subject. The subject was attention. The real lesson was presence. And you paid attention. You paid attention to everything. You noticed the shape of clouds before a storm arrived. You sensed the smell of pine rising in the morning air. You observed how tea cools just before it stops steaming. You listened to the rhythm of the river's voice and knew how it slowed in anticipation of rain. You did not glance at the world. You watched it. You did not merely hear it. You listened for its tempo. You recognized its subtle cues. You treated the world not as scenery but as a partner. You stepped into its rhythm with your own. Even your art reflected that same awareness. Your brushstrokes were not loud. Your paintings did not ask for applause. They were focused. Intentional. Refined through reduction. One hawk, perched alone on a weathered branch. A mountain ridge, rendered with just a handful of precise lines. A pine tree, twisted by years of wind, bearing one blossom that had just begun to open, leaning toward the east. No shine. No pretense. Just essence. Just what was. Your calligraphy echoed the same philosophy. Some called it crude. Others called it raw. But it was honest. It moved like weather. It flowed like thought. It did not chase perfection. It expressed truth. It was asymmetrical, imperfect, rhythmic. It pulsed with life. Scholars still debate its meaning. They ask whether you painted in anger or calm. They argue whether it was brilliance or accident. But you would have shrugged and said what you always said. I painted as I breathed. And for you, that was enough. Your students noticed. The true ones. Not the ones chasing prestige. Not the ones who wanted to impress. The few who arrived with quiet hunger. You did not lecture them. You did not preach. You gave them puzzles. Small tasks. A spoon. A stone. A broom. You told one student to walk until his feet blistered, then write his name in dust. You told another to watch a cat hunt all day without blinking. You assigned focus, not form. One student came to you broken, tears in his eyes, ashamed of a lost duel. You handed him a spoon and said, "Stir tea without making a sound. Come back when you know how." He returned weeks later. Calmer. Changed. You did not speak of it again. Another asked how to become unbeatable. You answered only, "Stop thinking about yourself." He did not understand for years. But in time, he did. You did not seek disciples. You sought practitioners. You sought those who could carry rhythm, not legacy. Those who would choose the long road even if it led nowhere but into the mist. Those who would endure hardship not for recognition, but for truth, because the road, the long, winding, uncertain road you walked again and again, was always your teacher, not the ring, not the sword, not the scroll. It was the world that taught you. Its friction. Its silence. Its cold indifference. Its clarity. Its sharpness. The world gave you lessons not through theory, but through lived experience. You learned not by reading, but by enduring. You passed your tests not by answering, but by remaining present. You came to see something that many never glimpse, that mastery is not a moment of victory. It does not shine like polished metal. It does not call out like a drumbeat. Mastery is quieter. It looks like curiosity that has been shaped by discipline. It looks like waiting when nothing needs to be said. It looks like movement that holds itself until the time is right. And the courage to strike when it finally arrives. And then, there was the void, the fifth scroll. The shortest. The most enigmatic. The one that even seasoned readers cannot easily grasp. You wrote, "In the void is virtue, and no evil. Wisdom has existence, principle has existence, the way has existence, spirit is nothingness." They debate it endlessly. They call it metaphor. They call it riddle. They think it's an unfinished thought. A draft left incomplete. But you had finished it. You had arrived at the edge of language. You had moved beyond what words could hold. The void was your final gift. Your final doorway, because you understood that not all truths are taught through explanation. Some truths live only in space. In the stillness before the swing. In the quiet after the strike. In the pause that wraps the earth just before dawn lights the cave mouth with gold, that is where rhythm begins, and you knew how to wait in that place. Your teachings still breathe. Not because they demand attention. But because they wait. Not because they command. But because they remain. They do not shout. They sit silently until the listener is ready. And then, when the time is right, they reach out a hand, because rhythm still lives, your rhythm. And anyone, even now, can still find it, not by copying your stance, not by memorizing your words, but by stepping forward with full attention, by moving only when necessary, by releasing what is too heavy to carry. That is what made you more than a man with a sword, more than an artist, more than a mentor, more than a name passed down in stories. That is what made you a path, a direction carved not by glory, but by perseverance, a motion made visible through repetition. A quiet momentum that still echoes, still walked, still honored, still alive, even when no one speaks. Even silence can be misread. That is something you understood long before others found the words to explain it. Long before stillness was marketed as tranquility. Long before silence became fashionable in books and meditation halls, before it was folded into brochures and sold as serenity. You had already lived it. You had already studied it. In the final years of your life, when your steps grew slower and your limbs less certain, when your voice faded into something just above a whisper, the world around you began to weave stories. Not stories you spoke. Not stories you wrote. But stories they projected. They saw how you sat, spine unyielding, hands resting with intention, gaze steady but turned inward. And they imagined peace. They saw stillness and assumed conclusion. They believed you had transcended. That the noise had ended, the battles were behind you, the storms cleared, and what remained was your reward. A calm earned through greatness. A quiet born of clarity. As if stillness had arrived effortlessly. As if silence meant everything had resolved, but you knew better. You always had, you had stripped those illusions away long before. You had torn them down with the same sharpness you used to refine your sword work. For you, stillness was not a prize. It was not an escape from labor. It was labor in its purest form. The most difficult movement to master. The most subtle. Stillness was not absence. It was presence with weight. It was motion turned inward. It was practice without spectacle. It was discipline invisible to the eye but immense in demand. Beneath the hush of the cave walls, beneath the long silences between the few words you allowed yourself, beneath the dust that drifted across still stone, you were working. You were refining. Not through repetition. Not through brute force. But through attention. Through a gaze sharp enough to carve away distraction. Through a focus so fine it resembled prayer. It was not meditation for calm. It was confrontation without defense. And at the center of that confrontation was something few dare to face, acceptance, not the soft kind. Not the comforting idea that things will eventually make sense. Not the narrative that everything happens for a reason. It was the harder kind. The kind that arrives without comfort. The kind that sits across from you in silence and asks without words, what are you still clinging to? There were days when your body faltered, days when your joints throbbed with rhythmic pain. Days when your breath caught in your chest like a wave collapsing before the shore. Days when your eyesight blurred, and memory mixed moments into fog. The cave did not shield you from age. It did not halt decay. It stripped away distraction. It left you face to face with time. With the disassembling of strength. With the erosion of certainty. With the truth that waits behind the noise, and you did not flee, you stayed. You remained present. You sat still through it all. You watched how light moved across the rock, so slowly it seemed time itself had stopped to observe. You listened to water making its hidden journey through cracks in stone. You let the cave become your teacher. And it taught you what no battlefield could. What it gave you was not relief. Not peace in the way others imagined. It gave you awareness, awareness that your sharpest edges, your speed, your ferocity, your ability to take command of a room, had not disappeared. They had changed shape. They had quieted. They had become something smaller, something hidden. Like an ember beneath cooled ash. Like a blade held within its sheath. Like the wind just before the storm returns. There was power in that restraint. A kind of strength that asked for no witness. That required no demonstration. You began to see what others had not yet learned, that the most commanding presence in a space is not always the one who speaks first. It is not the one who moves quickly or carries the sharpest weapon. It is the one who knows when not to act. When not to interrupt. The one whose silence is not empty, but full. Full of clarity. Full of understanding. Full of weight, and that quiet presence did not stay confined to you, it radiated outward. Slowly. Subtly. Like ink spreading through paper. Like warmth passing from hand to hand. It did not spread as command. It spread as invitation. People remembered your victories. They listed your undefeated record. They recited your cleverness. They etched your name into legend. But others, fewer, softer, turned to your scrolls with a different kind of attention. They didn't read them for combat. They read them for something else. They paused over your drawings. They studied the emptiness in your brushwork. And they began to suspect something. Maybe you had not been chasing victory, maybe you had been chasing understanding. One student, Tereo, understood this in part. He did not boast. He did not hunger for applause. He was careful. He gathered your writings. He copied your words by hand, one stroke at a time. He shielded them from dust and distortion. He did not embellish you. He preserved you. As you were. But even he, cautious as he was, could not hold back time. Because time rewrites. Time reinterprets. It reshapes meaning whether we invite it or not. In one version of your story, they say your brush was elegant, poised like a crane standing in snow. In another, it was called clumsy, rough, but sincere. In a third, your lines are said to tear through paper with ferocity. Each version believes itself. Each version contradicts the others. Maybe they are all true, maybe none are. People crave answers. You gave them questions. Not to confuse. Not to conceal. But because truth is rarely fixed. It does not sit inside a single phrase. You trusted silence to carry meaning. You left space for others to fill. You let the gaps speak for themselves. You asked without explaining. You let your students discover. Not because you doubted your own knowledge, but because you knew learning had to be earned alone. Through silence, you asked, what does strength look like when no one is watching? What is victory without applause? What does it mean to stand alone and still remain whole? To defend without rage? To lose without shame? To walk away without bitterness? You did not answer. You became the question. Not through perfection, through repetition. Through commitment. Through return. There is a story, seldom told, about a duel you chose not to complete. At the final moment, your opponent left himself open. The strike was yours. The match could have ended. But in his eyes, you saw something unexpected. Not fear. Not pleading. Something gentler. Grief. Familiar grief. The kind that does not cry, but sits heavily in the chest. The kind you carried yourself. And in that moment, you lowered your blade. You stepped away. You said nothing. There was no moral. No speech. Just movement. Just silence. That man never forgot. Years passed. He taught others. He did not name you. He did not cite your techniques. But in his pauses, in his breath, in the way he listened before acting, you were there. You were present in his absence of ego. He did not repeat your words. But your rhythm moved through him, and now, your presence endures in places you never touched. A violinist, bow raised, waits without moving. Her body still. Her lungs stilled by preparation. Her silence thick with intent. She does not know your name. But she moves like you. A construction worker steps across a narrow beam, each footfall measured. He does not stumble. He does not rush. He has never read your scrolls. But he walks with your balance. A woman turns away from an argument. She answers nothing. Not because she is afraid, but because she sees the damage that speaking would bring. Because she understands that silence, when chosen, is not surrender. She has never quoted your teaching. But she lives its truth. These are not imitations, they are echoes, because mastery does not always roar, sometimes it waits, sometimes it chooses stillness. You once wrote, the purpose of today's training is to defeat yesterday's understanding. Many read this as instruction for growth. For technique. And it is. But it is more than that. It is a map for transformation. A call to let go, to shed, to release victories already won, to move beyond comfort, to let each identity fall away so that something truer might surface. You did this over and over. You stepped away from recognition. You let go of admiration. You walked out of the ring, not because you had nothing left to prove, but because you knew you still had more to learn. You went to the cave not to vanish, but to return, and now, what remains is not made of bronze or stone, not metals, not monuments, not statues etched by distant hands. What remains is rhythm, the stillness you shaped until it sharpened. The motion you drew not in combat, but in air, in breath, in the invisible space between a thought and its release, a path not marked, but remembered, not mapped, but felt, and that path, it remains, it waits, not for praise, only for someone willing to walk it. What's strange is how little of you remains, and how much of you continues in spite of that. Your bones, long dissolved, have become part of the earth itself. Whatever pieces of your physical form once existed have scattered into the quiet anonymity of the soil. There is no traceable ash, no relic to cradle in reverent hands. Even your swords, if any of them are truly yours, now rest behind thick panes of museum glass, trapped under the glow of security lights, encased like sacred artifacts. They are too brittle to be handled, too honored to be drawn. Their blades, once extensions of your will, have lost their edge. The sheen has faded. The balance has dulled. They have passed from tools of mastery to symbols of legend. Used more to illustrate a myth than to understand a man. They are studied, photographed, talked about. But they are no longer used. No longer alive, the cave at Riogando still opens its mouth to the wind. It remains exactly where you left it, carved into the hillside, shadowed by trees that bend in silence. Cold. Wide. Patient. Not just shaped by time and weather, but by waiting. Waiting for your return. Waiting for understanding. It is more visited now than it ever was while you lived. What was once your place of retreat has become a destination. A way station on spiritual tours. A line on a traveler's map. It has been labeled. Described. Reviewed. People bring cameras. Water bottles. Guidebooks. Some speak in hushed tones. Some laugh, unsure of the appropriate emotion. A few stand at the entrance, nodding awkwardly or bowing with half-understood reverence. And some try to emulate you. They sit cross-legged near the back, where the stone is cool. They close their eyes. They steady their breathing. They seek whatever it was that held you there, but after a few minutes, most grow restless. They shift their legs. They glance around. They check their watches or their phones. They rise, brush the dust from their clothes, and leave. The silence unsettles them. The cave does not speak back. It gives no instruction. It offers no flash of revelation, and yet, not everyone departs so quickly. Some remain. Not because they know what they are looking for, but because they feel that something is present. They linger for an hour. Sometimes two. They do not ask questions aloud, but something unspoken begins to stir inside them. The quiet becomes louder than any voice. The stillness becomes charged with meaning they cannot define. When they eventually rise to leave, they do not walk away with answers. They carry a question instead. A question they did not arrive with. And that question travels with them, long after they have stepped back into the world. That is how your legacy continues now, not through parades, not through statues, not through celebration, but through breath, through stillness, through the quiet transmission of clarity from one moment of attention to another. From one life to the next, you built no monuments to yourself. You left behind no declarations, no ornate instructions for how to honor your name. You asked for no tribute. You designated no successor. You once wrote, "Respect Buddha and the gods," without counting on their help. And perhaps, if you had written just one more line, it might have said, "Respect your legacy, but do not depend on it." You lived without attachment to permanence. And yet, despite that, or perhaps because of it, you became something enduring, your name has become a kind of compass. It has traveled into places far beyond anything you might have imagined. Into rooms with polished floors and fluorescent lights. Into boardrooms with sleek chairs and strategic goals. Into military classrooms where generals underline your words on a projector screen. Your teachings, pulled from scrolls written by candlelight, are now applied to quarterly deadlines, campaign plans, and corporate conflicts. Your advice on combat has been adapted for conversations on negotiation, team dynamics, and market timing. In dojos suspended high above city streets, your stances are mimicked by students whose swords are wooden, whose armor is foam. They repeat the movements. They recite your name. They feel the weight of your shadow, even if they do not fully understand what it means. Online, faceless profiles argue over your intent, they dissect your phrasing. They debate your contradictions. Some claim to understand you perfectly. Others accuse you of obscurity. And still, your words persist. Not because they are easily understood, but because they resist simplicity. You did not write to instruct, you wrote to reveal. You were not teaching how to defeat an opponent, you were teaching how to live in the tension between clarity and chaos. You told your readers to strike without delay. And also to wait with patience. You told them to flow like fire and stand like stone. To see all things while focusing on none. Your teachings were not clean lines. They were riddles. Not tricks, but truths, shaped by paradox, carried by rhythm. The Book of Five Rings still baffles readers. It does not give formulas. It does not offer 10 easy steps. It never guarantees success. It opens a door and waits. You did not say, use this technique. You said, watch when your opponent's rhythm begins to break. You spoke of posture, presence, awareness. You described the moment when something invisible begins to shift. And that moment? It applies to far more than battle. It applies to sorrow, when structure dissolves, to career, when the goalposts move, to relationships, when understanding is lost, to the aging body, when old rhythms fail, to the artist's hand, when instinct must replace precision. Your art has become a chapter of its own. There are now galleries that house your brushwork. Tucked in quiet museum halls, your scrolls are hung alongside those of trained masters. Curators lean close. Historians tilt their heads. Some paintings are bold, filled with assured gestures. Others are delicate, almost hesitant. One image is returned to again and again, a lone bird perched on a bare branch. No background. No horizon. The bird stares away, into a blank sky you chose not to paint. A child once pointed to the image and asked, why is there so much empty space? His father paused. Then he said, that's where the wind goes. You would have smiled at that, because you understood what so many overlook. Emptiness is not absence. It is invitation. It leaves space for meaning to enter. It makes room for the viewer, for the student, for the next moment to arrive without being told what to see. That openness, that adaptability, was always the soul of your style. You knew that systems carved in stone cannot bend. And what cannot bend, eventually breaks. But what flexes, survives. What adjusts, endures. Your two-sword style continues today, not because it was preserved unchanged, but because it was built to evolve. Students shift the stances. They adjust the grips. They modify the forms to fit new times. But they never change the essence. Two swords. One mind. Balance over brute force. Precision above domination. You once wrote, the primary thing when you take a sword in your hands is your intention to cut the enemy, whatever the means. Modern teachers soften it. They say instead, be clear in your purpose. Everything else will follow. And so, your name becomes a point of return. For the martial artist, about to bow. For the student, about to fail. For the leader, about to decide. They say your name not as ritual. Not as magic, but as reminder. Because somewhere within them, they know the truth, the enemy is rarely external, the real struggle begins within, with doubt, with hesitation, with the voice that whispers, "You do not belong here." You knew that voice, you heard it many times. At first, you answered with fire, then, with discipline, eventually, with silence. You did not defeat fear. That is not your story. You lived with it. You breathed with it. You walked beside it. You shared your cave with it. And slowly, it lost its shape. It became something you could hold. Not destroy. But understand, that is why your story remains, not because of the duels you won, not because of your fame, not because of the carved record of victories, but because of your direction. You did not teach how to triumph over others, you taught how to survive storms, how to stay whole in disorder, how to remain grounded in the center of upheaval. Even now, when the wind moves through the cave where you once sat, it seems to echo with your voice. It says, "Be steady when the world tries to shake you, be sharp when truth arrives, move only when it matters, stop when it is time, and keep walking, always walk forward, even if no one sees, even if the path vanishes. Even if your name is no longer spoken, because rhythm does not need applause, it only needs to be followed." You always suspected you would be misunderstood, that quiet suspicion lingered in your thoughts for years, never loud, never urgent, but persistent, like a breath you could not fully release. It trailed you through each stage of your life, a subtle echo in the background of your practice, like a shadow that did not vanish even in direct sunlight. You never tried to chase it away. You let it stay. You accepted its presence. It was one of the many reasons you wrote the Book of 5 Rings the way you did. You did not offer it as a manual filled with tidy rules or linear instructions. It was not a declaration meant to be memorized. It was something closer to a labyrinth. A set of turns and corners. A pattern made of rhythm, silence, and suggestion. You built it like a map with missing pieces, deliberately incomplete, so the reader would have to walk it rather than simply observe it. You understood the weight of language, you understood how words could carry more than they were meant to. How easily they could drift away from their roots. How quickly they could be bent by pride or fear or longing or ambition. You had seen it. Again and again. People only hear what they are prepared to hear. They translate through the filter of their own wounds and desires. So instead of giving step-by-step instruction, you gave them something different. You handed them rhythm. You offered shapes that could not be reduced to formulas. You created a constellation of phrases, of images and absences. Not to be decoded, but to be felt. Not to be mastered, but to be lived inside. You gave them paradox, not to confuse, but to awaken. You wanted them to stumble, to pause, to observe, to breathe with the words, not just consume them. And even now, centuries after your hand last touched ink or blade, the world is still trying to understand you, still trying to feel you out. A strategist in a glass tower in Manhattan quotes your words in a meeting. Your name appears on a slide, printed in bold beneath a graph showing projections and percentages. He stumbles over the pronunciation. He does not pause long enough for the meaning to land. He moves on. A content creator in Sao Paulo animates your most famous duel, breaking it into still frames, narrating each footfall as if it were choreography. He overlays graphics and arrows, trying to dissect your rhythm into data points. A collector in Berlin polishes a steel replica of your blade while lo-fi music hums in the background. He murmurs your teachings aloud, hoping that if he gets the cadence just right, something ancient might return. But these people are not you, they were never meant to be, they do not need to mirror your movements or wear your name like armor. They are not supposed to become your reflection. They are reaching for something you left behind. Not a formula. Not a perfect method. Not a single path, clearly marked. What they reach for is a pulse. A rhythm without fixed origin. A subtle signal that continues to move, even now. Even though the hand that first created it has long returned to the earth, your teachings endure not because they are complete, they endure because they remain alive, they breathe with the reader, they change shape with the listener, they bend and twist depending on the moment. They evolve with the ones who hold them. You once wrote, "Do nothing which is of no use." It is a small line. Easy to overlook. Compact enough to slip past without pause. But the longer someone carries it, the heavier it becomes. What does it mean, truly, to be useful? Does usefulness lie in outcomes? In applause? In efficiency? Is it useful to lie on the ground and watch clouds move? To write a poem that no one else will read? To love someone without knowing whether that love will ever be returned? The sentence does not offer clarity. It offers tension. It does not resolve. It resists resolution. It is a question tucked inside a command. It is a thread meant to be pulled, not tied. It stirs thought instead of settling it. It lives beneath the surface, waiting to rise when the reader is ready. You wrote that way with intent, not to obscure. Not to make yourself untouchable. But to provoke something real. Something lived. You wanted your readers to move, not to mimic. You wanted them to think, not to memorize. You knew that true clarity cannot be handed to someone. It must be built. It must be uncovered through repetition, through failure, through doubt. You trusted the process more than any explanation. You believed that a single good question could reshape a life more deeply than 1,000 answers. There is a quiet story, shared only in fragments, about a painting. They say you once painted a tiger in one breath. One brushstroke. No preparation. No hesitation. When the ink dried, you tore the paper in half and set it aside. A student, stunned by the power and elegance of the movement, asked why you destroyed it. You said only, "I wanted to know if I could. Not to prove that I could." That moment held everything, the difference between practice and performance, between ego and curiosity, between mastery as display and mastery as truth. You did not create to impress. You created to understand. You were not chasing perfection. You were chasing presence, the real kind. The kind that asks for nothing. The kind that makes no announcement. The kind that moves through a room quietly, watching before acting, aware before speaking. As your years gathered, you began to release old rituals. You stopped bowing. Not because you lacked respect, but because you realized that when your body held reverence, when your breath moved with intention, gestures became unnecessary. You stopped drawing your sword unless the rhythm called for it. You stopped speaking unless the silence asked to be filled. You had learned that real clarity is not noise. It is not found in noise. It lives underneath it. It hides beneath the surface, beneath the flood of words and shouts and distractions. That truth remains elusive in the modern world. The air is crowded now, heavy, the scroll of content never ends. The noise never pauses. Your words are clipped and posted. Cut and rearranged. Shared for views. Argued over. Repackaged as content. People debate your meaning. They take sides. They form conclusions in minutes. And then they move on, but far away from all that, in the dark corner of a quiet kitchen, in the middle of a sleepless night, someone opens your book. Maybe their life is unraveling, maybe they are not searching for inspiration, maybe they are searching for something more honest, not a hero, a mirror. Their eyes fall on a line. You may abandon your own body, but you must preserve your honor. They read it once, then again, they stop, and something inside begins to shift, because they realize, it is not about dying bravely. Not about legacy. Not about glory. It is about integrity. About holding on to something essential even when everything else is falling away. About standing inside yourself without armor. About walking forward when there is no one left to applaud or watch or judge. You knew how to do that, eventually. It was not a trait you were born with, it was something you built, with time. With trial. With years. Years of getting it wrong, years of walking alone through unfamiliar places, years of waking up unsure, years of battles you never celebrated, years of mistakes that no scroll ever recorded, but you walked forward anyway. You never stopped, and now, even though your voice has gone silent, your outline remains, not carved into stone, not standing on a pedestal, but moving through the world like a quiet rhythm, a way of stepping. A way of listening. A way of returning to yourself when everything else tries to pull you apart. Even your death taught something. It did not come as spectacle, you did not die in a blaze, you did not end with ceremony, you did not give a final lesson. You simply stopped, like a final breath, like a brush lifted from the paper, no flourish. No punctuation, just silence, and that silence became your last teaching. It whispered, "It is done," not "I am finished." Not "remember me." Only this, "It is done," the rhythm has played, the form has been fulfilled, the shape has held, now the hand must pass, to someone else, someone new, someone shaped by different winds, walking their own path, who will not try to become you but will become more fully themselves because of you. That was always your intent, not to be preserved in glass, not to be quoted endlessly, but to be understood, to be used wisely. To be set down when no longer needed. You once wrote, "When you attain the way of strategy, there will not be one thing you cannot see." That kind of vision does not come from tightening your grip, it comes from loosening it, from letting go, from releasing the need to control, and now, the world continues, it spins, it rushes, it sings with chaos, it trembles with urgency, but beneath it all, your rhythm still moves, quiet, steady, clear, not loud, not bright, but present, with awareness, with attention, with breath. There is a kind of ending that does not announce itself, it does not come with a crash. It does not crumble into dust or shout for attention. It does not call out in pain or fold under pressure. Instead, it unfolds slowly. So slowly, in fact, that most people do not even recognize it as an ending when it begins. Like a river that forgets its own urgency as it stretches into a wide, still basin. Like footsteps that grow fainter the farther they travel down a corridor. Like a candle that does not flicker out but simply ceases to glow. That is the kind of ending you chose. Or perhaps, to speak more truly, it is the kind of ending that found you and waited patiently at your side. There was no final duel to mark your departure. No dramatic clash beneath storm clouds. No whispered goodbye exchanged beneath the heavy weight of legend. There was no dramatic pause, no parting of teacher and student beneath the shade of a tree. No final lesson carved into stone. There were no secrets passed down in trembling hands, no scroll rolled shut in a grand final gesture. There was only breath. Steady. Calm. Deeply human. The kind of breath that knows itself completely, without needing to prove anything to anyone. You never had an appetite for spectacle. Never found value in fireworks at the end of the road. You lived your life within structure. Within the exact and deliberate space between decision and consequence. Within the curve of intention. So why should death, the final movement, the last instruction, need to be anything different? Why would you require noise, when your entire life had honored silence? When you passed, the cave did not shake, there was no tremor. No crack in the walls. But something in the air shifted, briefly. The silence deepened. Even the wind seemed to hesitate at the entrance, as if taking one respectful breath before moving on. And eventually, as time always does, it did move on. And with that movement came people. They arrived in slow waves at first. A few curious steps on the stone outside. Then more, in steady numbers. Some came in search of meaning. Others came looking for stories. A handful wanted only the novelty of standing where you once sat, their feet tracing the same lines worn into the ground by yours. They brought small offerings. Bits of incense. Flowers placed carefully near the rock that once held your weight. Some brought cameras and bottled water, whispering to each other through earbuds, listening to guides explain your name in hurried fragments. They took photos. They looked around. They lingered just long enough to feel polite, and then they left, unsure of what they had come for or what they had found. But not all of them, some stayed longer. They stayed past the shuffle of visitors, past the awkward pauses. They stayed past the first wave of curiosity, and then past the second wave of silence. They stayed until the cave stopped feeling like a destination and began to feel like something else. A place not of answers, but of rhythm. Of stillness with shape. Of breath with memory. They did not find what they were looking for. But they left with something they had not expected. A question. One they had never asked before. And that question lingered, because what remains in the cave is not a ghost. It is not some echo of your voice preserved in stone. What remains is rhythm, your presence endures not in stories told too often or statues carved too cleanly. It lingers in how people enter a space now. In how they settle into themselves. In how they lower their shoulders and become aware of their breathing. In how they pause for a moment before movement. Not to be seen. Not to impress. But to align. To wait. To listen until their heartbeat begins to match the world around them. You are not in the arc of the blade, you are in the pause before it begins to move, that sacred stillness, that moment of readiness, that quiet before the choice. Still, misunderstandings persist, they always will. People invoke your name to justify conquest. They ask how to win. How to outmaneuver. How to strike first and last. They repeat your teachings with force in their tone, forgetting the solitude behind your words. They admire your technique, but overlook your restraint. They celebrate your victories, but ignore the surrender you made to silence. They want your edge, but not your patience. They want your power, but not your process. That is all right. Some truths do not bloom until the season is long enough, some lessons require time and silence to be heard, and some people do understand. There is a woman, steady and quiet, training in a modest dojo as the sun falls behind the trees. Her movements are deliberate, grounded. She recites your scrolls before practice, not as commands, but as invitations. She teaches her students that strength is not in domination, but in perception. That victory is not the point. That awareness must come before action. She knows that stillness must precede form. That rhythm must lead the strike. There is a teenager, curled up on the floor of a noisy apartment. The walls shake with voices, but their eyes are on your words. They have no sword. No formal training. No teacher but the pages in their lap. They found your book in a thrift store, yellowed and forgotten. They read it slowly. Line by line. Their breath becomes their training. Their listening becomes their discipline. They learn to carry calm inside the noise. There is a man, near the closing of his own life. His body weakens, but his awareness sharpens. He returns to your teachings not for their tactics, but for their stillness. He does not want strategy. He wants peace. He does not seek your victories. He seeks your surrender. Because your writings do not offer glory. They offer clarity. And in the end, that is the greater gift. You once wrote, the way is in training. Not in victory, not in applause, not in destination. But in the act itself, in the daily return, in the repetition that becomes revelation. And now that you are gone, that training continues, through ink, through sweat, through quiet footsteps and unspoken lessons, through the attention paid to small moments. This is your real continuation, not your name printed in textbooks. Not your legend retold in dramatized battles. Not even the cave, though it still stands, quiet and waiting. It is the way you moved, it is the rhythm you followed, the one you left behind without needing to point at it. So now we arrive, at the last breath, at the soft closing of the final page, at the final movement in a life composed of motion. It does not end with thunder, it does not end with cheers, it ends with release. You placed it all down, your sword, your brush, your reputation, your ego, you let it go without regret. Your hands, quiet now, rest upon your knees, your eyes, as always, face the east, and then they close, not to vanish, not to disappear, but to see again, more clearly, somewhere else, somewhere the rhythm still flows, somewhere the path still extends. Somewhere the sword is no longer a weapon, it is a question, and the only answer is this: keep walking. So here you are, still now. Not because you were stopped, but because you chose to stop. There is no wound on your body, no cry on your lips. Just a calmness, earned the long way. The tension you carried, across decades, across duels, across disciplines, has dissolved. Your jaw has softened. Your hands are no longer clenched. Your shoulders have fallen into ease. The air moves gently across your skin, and you feel lighter. Not gone. Just less burdened. The rhythm that carried you through your days has slowed to its final cadence. Not silence, exactly. But something even softer. Something that does not demand attention. Like the last notes of a song that continue to hum even after the instrument is set down. Your eyes are closed now. But not in darkness. In rest, there are no more opponents to read. No more strategies to test. No more scrolls to annotate. No more apprentices awaiting instruction. There is just this moment. This quiet. This space between what was and what might be. The cave is no longer a place of retreat. It has become something else. A cradle, maybe. A kind of return. The stone beneath you, once a seat of reflection, now holds you like memory. The walls that once echoed your breath now listen. The silence itself has texture. It wraps around you, not to trap, but to hold. You did not live for ease. You did not chase fame. You did not seek comfort, and now, at the edge of everything, you do not grasp. You do not cling, you simply let go, and with that release, a new kind of peace enters, not because you conquered. Not because you triumphed, but because you no longer need to. There is no final victory here. No prize waiting beyond the veil. Just this, stillness, rhythm, surrender without fear. So, if you are listening from the quiet of your own room, if your body is resting after a long day, if your breath has slowed to match the story's pace, then let it settle, let this rhythm become your own, let it cradle you, not as instruction, but as invitation, let sleep find you, not as escape, but as alignment, and remember, even here, even now, the way continues. And with every breath you take, you are walking it too.